Mount up! We're coming!
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Purple Insider presented by FanDuel. Matthew Coller here, and it's just a regular old Wednesday night, and there's plenty of room on the show for questions, thoughts, takes, opinions surrounding the Minnesota Vikings. I did write a story recently on the Vikings offensive line options, if anybody wants to talk about that, as opposed to Sam Darnold. And that is really the subject of tonight's show, which is how do the Minnesota Vikings and how do fans move on from Sam Darnold making the Super Bowl? And I know that you're about to get a huge week leading up to the Super Bowl because this week is very quiet. Not much going on in terms of the Super Bowl, but a lot going on for coach searches and Bill Belichick not making the Hall of Fame somehow, which I've got a few thoughts on the Hall of Fame voting process, which has frustrated me for a couple of years now. Since a few years ago when they put in, I think it was like 20 people that they had backlogged for a long time. They have made it even harder for the greats to get into the Hall of Fame, which I think loses the thread a little bit of the reason why we have a Hall of Fame, which is to put in the people that fans would like to celebrate. So there's some thoughts there, and anything else is on the table for you. But I think it's two different stories for the moving on from the Sam Darnold. And number one on this team, the team side, is we can talk about all day long, and I wrote a very large and long story about process versus results and whether the Vikings had the right process in moving on from Sam Darnold. And I think there is an argument on both sides of that, which I have, pushed some guests on and had that discussion with people, on social media and so forth, and you guys in the chat and everything about when you look back at the history of quarterbacks who perform like Sam Darnold, it's hard to find any of them who did not continue performing well, that guys who reached their peak at 26, 27, not really uncommon to see them continue to be really, really good at football and to be franchise quarterbacks. And not to mention that they just didn't have much information on JJ McCarthy and what he was going to look like, and then putting him into a 14-win team was a very, very big ask for JJ McCarthy. So I think that part of the whole process is pretty questionable. But then on the other side of it, they had planned for years to get to that point of the rookie quarterback contract. And when you look at the Bo Nix and you look at the Drake May, like that was their dream, right? Is to be able to build around the rookie quarterback contract. And they thought that they would be able to do enough for JJ McCarthy coaching wise, support wise. And they really missed, I think, chaos theory, which is actually, I don't know exactly the definition of chaos theory, but whatever it is of, things that you don't anticipate going wrong. So not having your left tackle, McCarthy getting injured multiple times. I mean, Jordan Addison being suspended, you knew about if you were the Vikings, but losing defensive players that would then put more pressure on the offense early in the season before the defense got back to 100%. And that JJ McCarthy was not able to pick up where he left off in 2024 training camp, which was the information that they were working with, and thought, well, if he picks up after that, then he'll be, pretty good. And I think there was some question of not just the way that it ended for Sam Darnold, but can he really continue to do it when this is such an outlier season? And he had, some of the worst numbers among starting quarterbacks in previous years. He hadn't even been a starter 2 years before that. So you could go back and forth all day long. I tend to think that when you are trying to calculate what the odds are of Darnold not continuing to be good, what the odds are of JJ McCarthy being ready without any play whatsoever, and when you look at the history of quarterbacks that didn't throw that many passes in college, which I went through in the article, but the different quarterbacks who had that as part of their history, the only ones that succeeded took years or were like Cam Newton. And even Cam Newton, it took a little while. And Kyler Murray was actually another one of those quarterbacks, and it took a while. He didn't come right in and dominate in the NFL because those guys needed work. So that's where I go, back and forth with all of you. And, some folks have said, well, it doesn't really matter because they weren't going to win the Super Bowl with Darnold. So I would rather find out about JJ McCarthy. And my response to that is, well, you would have been in the dance though, and you would have had a chance at it more likely than not. So would you rather, wait a year to find out more about JJ McCarthy and have a chance to compete for the Super Bowl, or neither of those things, I guess, or just find out that McCarthy wasn't ready to do it? I don't know. So I've had a lot of trouble getting on the side of, oh yeah, they had the right process. And then I go back to, and if you want to read this entire article, it's at purpleinsider.football, the daily newsletter. Feel free to sign up. You can sign up free and get some of it, or if you want to support the show, that's a good way that you can do it. But I went back to a quote from Stan Van Gundy, and this is where I'm going to get to my point about moving on from Sam Darnold, where Stan Van Gundy was on Zach Lowe's podcast a couple years ago. Zach Lowe is one of my favorites, as he is, I think, for everybody who follows the NBA at all. And what Stan Van Gundy said, Zach was giving him some praise for a play that he had called at the end of a game that didn't work out. And he said, hey, you called a great play. The guy just didn't make the shot. And Stan Van Gundy said, well, obviously it wasn't a great play because we didn't score and we didn't win. And if it was a great play, then we would have won, right? If it didn't work out, I must have needed to call something else. And I think of the same way a little bit with this, where maybe it makes you feel a little better to say, well, we wouldn't have won the Super Bowl anyway if Sam Darnold had come back, or, well, it's Clint Kubiak's running game that's really doing it, or the offensive line, or whatever it might be, which they don't have a great offensive line. Their offensive line is healthy, which really helps, but it's not great. And, the Vikings have a great defense, and even if you took some money off of it, it would still probably be pretty darn good, but that's not really the point. The point is that the results are what they are, and they have consequences. And those consequences are that the Minnesota Vikings are watching Sam Darnold in the Super Bowl, and they don't have a clear-cut answer at the quarterback position. So there's, how do the Vikings deal with that? Because they're still here with their leadership, Kevin O'Connell, Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah, and they are minus a couple of people in the coaching room. Durante Jones, congratulations to him. I'll talk about that as well tonight, getting a job for the Washington Commanders. But Brian Flores is back. They're going to get a new offensive line coach at some point. They're going to get a new defensive line coach, it seems, at some point. And then they will go into this offseason and try to figure out, how do you deal with this problem that you created? Whether it was all your fault, not any of your fault, totally bad luck, total bad process, it doesn't really matter. It matters to our analysis of it. It matters to trying to pick apart, how did you get here? And when you look back, was it foreseeable that you could be here? And of course the answer is yes, that it's foreseeable, because it was a huge risk. When you start to throw in all the odds into the bucket, odds that Darnold won't continue to be this good, odds that McCarthy is going to be great right away, odds that a quarterback that missed the entire first season, who's only 22 years old, is ready to take on, an entire franchise on his shoulders that just won 14 games, like all those things that you toss in. Based on a lot of history, the odds aren't really in your favor. But I think what they were trying to roll the dice for is, if we hit on even Bo Nix, then we'll have a really good chance to compete as Denver did. And I think that is a fair line of thinking. But the expectation from fans, which is the other part of this, was that they were supposed to have a really good feel of how far along JJ McCarthy would be. And once it started to play out during the season, and they start to talk about fundamentals all the time, and then start to talk about the dumbing down of the offense, as Aaron Jones called it, then you go, well, how did you, or why did you not understand how far that was going to have to go and how challenging that would be? And also, on both sides of it, there were people who did not agree with the decision to move over to JJ McCarthy, even within that own building. And I'm sure even within TCO Performance Center throughout the year, as Sam Darnold was succeeding, they were going back and forth on whose fault was it anyway? How did we really get here? From the fan perspective, the tough part is, well, the next 2 weeks, and then if Sam Darnold does win the Super Bowl, and that's got to hover over you forever, just as everything does for you guys. And I was thinking about this today as I was walking the dog, which I'm hoping gets a little bit warmer soon because I'm a little exhausted of walking the dog when it's 4 degrees or less. But I love them, so I do it. But as I was walking the dog today, I was thinking about how so much of Vikings discussion all the time always has to do with what if this, that, or the other thing. What if there's a field goal that doesn't go wide left, or the other field goal that doesn't go wide left? Or what if Teddy Bridgewater doesn't get hurt? Or what if Dante Culpepper doesn't get hurt? Or what if they didn't play the Rams last year and instead played the Bucks and then beat the Bucks and then had a home playoff game, and then maybe Sam Darnold is still here and not considered a choker, right? I mean, there's a line of thinking about even last year's playoffs that if Sam Darnold doesn't win in Seattle last year with that crazy throw to Justin Jefferson, then they never have to care about week 18. So they don't play their starters. Then they play the Bucks off of 2 weeks rest. The Bucks aren't that good, probably beat them. And then, well, I guess they wouldn't have been hosting a home playoff game, but then, well, they might have been depending on the seeding, right? They might have been hosting a home playoff game or playing somebody completely different. And then who knows what ends up happening and how we feel about Sam Darnold, right? Like these effects, the butterfly effects that Vikings fans are always picking apart. And was it my team's fault? Was it Denny Green's fault for not, maybe throwing one more time in 1998? Or was it, I don't know, the 12th man in the huddle's fault? Or there's always these things. And it always feels like Vikings fans are stuck in that circle of hell of always talking about, well, what should have or could have or whatever happened. What if they hadn't traded for Herschel Walker and then they make those draft picks and then do they get all those great players and everything? I mean, it's got to be, and I respect the resilience of Vikings fans to always keep coming back after this, because it's got to be so frustrating to be here once again, as opposed to talking about you found your guy and it clicked and what a brilliant move and et cetera, et cetera. It's the other guy is in the Super Bowl and there's no real actionable point to this. It's just, I feel for you when it comes to that, because that ends up being so often like your engagement with the Minnesota Vikings is always going back to these things. If it didn't fall this way, if it only had gone that way, then, maybe it's you and not the Seattle Seahawks and New England Patriots. What if Drake May is another thing? I mean, what if the Vikings just lose every game because Josh Dobbs doesn't figure out how to run into the end zone against the Falcons and beat the New Orleans Saints and have these meaningless wins that ended up pushing them kind of out of that draft slot, right? Like what would things be like now? So it makes it interesting for somebody like myself to pick all of that apart. But I also think at some point there's like a line in the sand where you have to draw and be like, no more of this, go win something. And it felt like they were en route to that with this regime, because I do respect that this regime, I think by moving on from Sam, and clearly erroneously, because he was capable of getting to the Super Bowl, I think that was their thought process though. I think their thought process was that, you have to use the rookie contract to aim for the Super Bowl, and the franchise tag would take away from their ability or their chances to actually get there. And they were not going to be able to sign Darnold to a very reasonable contract. And people have asked about this, about, well, what, they tried or they offered. There was no chance. Of course, they extended a reasonable offer or whatever, but there was no chance that he was coming back with the golden boy there and knowing that he was going to be traded out of there or whatever was going to happen. So, I think about that all the time from the two perspectives, and I want your thoughts on that. But then any other question is also wide open of the team now. You may not have meant to back over someone with your car, but you did. And now that's like the franchise. The franchise is down. It's just been hit by a car and it's down on the ground and it's wounded. How are you going to pick it up if you're this leadership? You may not meant to. You may have used your backup cam and looked twice and done everything, and your process may have been fine, but you still ran over the franchise with your car. So now how are you going to pick it back up, shake it off, and get it back in the game and go compete for the NFC North? Like, what's the answer here is going to determine how, because right now, how we remember KOC and Kwesi will be some fun moments and they let go of the guy who is in the Super Bowl. That's right now. I mean, if you're talking about how eras are defined, where, Mike Zimmer's era is defined by a number one defense, Minneapolis Miracle, and then the total and utter collapse of the franchise under Zimmer, and then him not saying hello to people in the hallways and culture of fear, right? Those are the way that it's defined. And I wasn't here for other eras, but you can, Brad Childress, what's it defined by? Well, it's defined by Brett Favre 09 and Brett Favre 2010 and the two sides of that, right? Right now, with Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and Kevin O'Connell, it's defined by a couple of highly entertaining seasons that ended awfully in the playoffs and then letting go a quarterback who went to the Super Bowl. Like that's your legacy right now, but you're still here to change it. And looking around the NFL, they should be looking up every night to the sky and saying, thank my lucky stars that I am, because a lot of other owners who maybe are much crazier than the Wilfs would have probably made a change here. Although I'm not saying that's a good idea because I think those owners are crazy. So thoughts, feelings, how do you fix it? How do you move on? How do you move on personally from your guys, from a fan perspective? Because I struggle with this from a content perspective. It's like I'm writing today about the defensive line and I'm looking at the different options and Dallas Turner and how he performed the second half of the year and what Jonathan Grenard did and Jalen Redmond. I'm kind of doing a look back and then a look forward for my article. But I still keep thinking about going back to you let go of the quarterback who's in the Super Bowl. It's really tough to move on. And then you guys got ideas, thoughts? I mean, how do you fix it? How do you get yourself back up off the ground after making this caliber of a mistake? And if Sam Darnold had gone to the Super Bowl, but the Vikings had played in the divisional round this year, and McCarthy had been good. Let's say he had an 87.5 quarterback rating, and he threw 19 touchdowns and 11 picks and averaged 8 yards an attempt and had a lot of good moments this year and got them to the playoffs. I think that we'd be having a different conversation. I think we'd be saying, hey, well, look, good for Sam Darnold, but they've got their quarterback to build on over multiple years. That's what they were looking for. It's the other side of it. It's not so much that Sam Darnold did it as much as, I mean, that's a major part of it, but as much as the person you moved on for him for was just nowhere close to being ready to be an NFL starter. And that's what makes this thing, I think, you just couldn't have farther polar opposites from someone who in every statistical category ranks like 38th out of 44 quarterbacks this year and somebody else who's representing the NFC. And when I get, the Darnold didn't have this great of a number at this or that or the other thing, it's like, come on, what are we talking about here? The whole reason you make decisions is always, can this guy get us to the Super Bowl? And if he's there, then he can. So, all right, let's get to your thoughts, questions, comments, we'll get going on that. Oh, let me give you the FanDuel question of the day first. The FanDuel question of the day is, and sorry, I don't mean to rub the salt in the wound at the moment, but Sam Darnold is the favorite to win MVP on FanDuel at plus 110. Are you rooting for Sam to bring home the Super Bowl MVP, or is that too hard? Is it too hard to root for Sam Darnold because of what has happened here? I'm curious if you're rooting for him or not. And there was, what I've said all year is you should say thank you, Sam Darnold, and congratulations because he didn't let himself go. He didn't have anything to do with JJ McCarthy not being ready. He was a class act here and worked his butt off and deserves what he's getting. So there's no reason. I think there's no like, who do you guys dislike? Sean Payton, Joe Buck. Like you've got reasons for that. You've got reasons to dislike Sean Payton and Joe Buck. You've got no reason to dislike Sam Darnold. But I'm curious if you can bring yourself to root for Sam Darnold. That is the FanDuel question of the day. And we'll have a lot of time to get into that. So let's get into your questions and thoughts. And we got plenty of time here. Oh, I was also going to mention that NFL Films did a thing with Sam Darnold where they had him talking to his fiance after the game. And just to tell you a little bit about him, I'm trying to make this a little bigger so you guys can see it. Let's see. Can you see that? I think. Well, I'm trying on the comments to get you to be able to see them. But so they had a thing with him and his fiance where they showed him talking to her after the game. And she said, you did it. You did it, Sam. And he said, we did it. And it referring, I assume, to his whole team, which I thought that was just typical Sam Darnold, like that's that guy. That's how he is as a teammate. And it says a lot about his leadership. And that was another part of it that makes the process part difficult is this is a guy who his teammates really cared about and treated people the right way and had a lot of heart and a lot of grit to get there. And that makes it harder because those things are really important in the NFL. Let's see. Doomer KO says the Vikings cannot move on from Sam Darnold in terms of, I assume you mean in terms of like, well, I'll read the rest of the comment. The players probably feel like their wife just cheated on them, even if they can forgive the front office. How can they trust them not to do it again? Oh, that's an interesting thought. Yeah, I mean, when it comes to like how that is an interesting thought of like how do the players in the locker room feel about? Sorry, I'm sliding this around, trying to get as big as I possibly can for the comments. How do the players? Yeah, I guess it's going to have to be kind of small. How do the players feel about this? Because you are talking about them sitting there and watching themselves, the quarterback that they loved and that they raised up on their shoulders and that their team moved on from. They're sitting there watching, the coach who made a decision, a general manager who made a decision that blew up in their face. And I mean, yeah, when you're talking about players and their discussions, I don't know if they always have it as nuanced as maybe we do and analytical as maybe we do. I think that one might be just a little bit more on the, hey, results are the results type situation. So, yeah, I mean, I think it will be hard for a lot of the players to deal with that and to have trust, I guess, is right. But at the same time, it's not like players don't buy into Kevin O'Connell. I think it's more of like a face palm for players. Like, I can't believe we did this. And not that they think that O'Connell can't coach or that his culture is wrong or whatever. Just, I can't believe we did this. And that, maybe part of your reaction as well. Let's see. So Mama MC says passing on Darnold was the worst decision in franchise history. My whole year is ruined. Yeah, I don't blame you for feeling that way. And there's a debate about, is it the worst decision in franchise history? And I've kind of said that it does make me think that maybe it's worse than Herschel Walker. I've gotten a few emails on that of making the case that Herschel Walker was worse. I don't know. The quarterback position has been such a bugaboo for the Vikings for so long. It's been this like forever chase. You know, those movies where the characters they go through fire and they have to fight different enemies and everything else, and they're chasing something, some sort of treasure, and they got to get to it or whatever. I'm thinking about, I don't know, like movies you watch as a kid. That's been the Vikings. Only at the end of the movie, the characters usually get what they're looking for, except for Vikings fans have never gotten that. And whether Darnold for a long, long period of time will be at this level, I mean, I guess is hard to say, but I mean, we're talking about back-to-back 14-win seasons and top 10 quarterback play. And you can argue, well, you know, this metric or that metric wasn't perfect for Sam Darnold this year, but this is somebody who's very talented. It's not like a Case Keenum situation where it just sort of fell backwards into a crazy season, had the number one defense. It really wasn't that way. And the Vikings had a good defense in 2024. They didn't have a great line. They didn't have a good running game at all. I mean, it was really all on his shoulders, and he did it, and he got them there. But when you get to the playoffs, the problem with judging the playoffs is that it's the best teams versus the best teams. And if you have weaknesses and you run into the wrong matchup, a great player can look silly. There are playoff games that Tom Brady lost. Go back to against the Ravens. What year is that? Is that one of the years against the Ravens against Flacco? Flacco doesn't even have to throw the ball. Was it like 07 or something like that? And they destroy the Patriots. Like, it happens to all quarterbacks. How about the Vikings versus Joe Montana? Is that 1987? It wasn't like Joe Montana won every single playoff game that he ever played in. And I'm not saying that Darnold is Joe Montana. I'm saying there's examples of a quarterback playing like that, Mahomes in the Super Bowl, time and time again, and judging it on that and saying, oh, he saw a ghost, he turned into a pumpkin, to me was always just bad logic. It was always bad logic. It was more likely that he was going to continue to be very good because he was the former number 3 overall pick. And because there are a lot of quarterbacks who start to peak in their mid-20s or who have a tough time early in their career and then have it click that you could go through. I mean, there's a dozen of those types of guys. Even, I spoke with Rich Gannon about Darnold last year, and he was the great example, but certainly not the only one. I mean, how about didn't Steve Young not become a top starter until he was like 30? And, Jim Kelly was in the USFL, and you can go back through the history and find a lot of that. But if you tried to judge quarterbacks based on their first playoff appearance alone and how they performed, well, you'd have to throw out Flacco. You'd have to throw out Eli Manning because he threw 3 interceptions in his. I think that's where maybe it frustrated me the most, was that so much of everything in the discussion seemed like it was about that rather than, hey, actually this guy's skill set and his talent really came into its own. And look at these throws. Was there luck behind the throws that Sam Darnold was making? Not really, because it was the talent. And then you see them again when he throws for 346 and 3 touchdowns. K-Skull says they should draft a center. I agree with that. And that's why Jake Slaughter at the Senior Bowl has my attention. I did a podcast with Sam Brookhouse, who's at the Senior Bowl, about Jake Slaughter. We talked about him for 10, 15 minutes, actually. That's got my attention as a potential second-round pick. But the center market is very thin. I mean, we're talking about 3 or 4 free agents who have been starters and 2 guys that are projected as maybe day 2 guys who could be starters. And that's it. I mean, that's really tough. That is really tough. I'm trying to make sure I get the whole. How did I have this the other night? I feel like I had this perfect the other night, and now I'm struggling. Did I have my window smaller? I bet I have my window smaller. Let me see if that works. Does that work? Okay, is this how I did it? I'm sorry if this is distracting. I think this is how I did it, to get trying to get everybody's whole comment on the screen. I think that's how I did it, is I just made the window a little bit thinner. Okay, sorry about that, everybody. Trying to get the comments big enough so you could see them. All right. Drew says you had the perfect girlfriend and let her go. Yeah, it is kind of like one of those movies, right? Only usually, if it's high fidelity, the girl leaves and then comes back in the movie. But in this case, you have to go find someone else. And I'm sure there's movies where someone finds someone else, which is sort of the point of where the show begins, which is how do you fix it if you're the Minnesota Vikings? Is it entirely there's another quarterback out there to get? Is it entirely on JJ McCarthy's shoulders? And it's his development, or this whole thing just goes into the toilet? Is it Aaron Rodgers, who got brought up in another athletic story? Is it Kirk Cousins coming back? Is it taking a swing at somebody else's quarterback? We know that Tua's not coming here, but is it an average quarterback? Is there a project out there? Like, there's all these different options, and yet seeing any of them being the fix is very tough. But I guess what you could say is that seeing Sam Darnold being the fix was very tough as well when he got here. I liked it as a bridge quarterback, but even I did not think that Sam Darnold was going to go off and win 14 games for the Vikings. Doomer says, I wish I could stop being a Vikings fan. I've abandoned all hope of the Vikings winning the Super Bowl and doomed to a lifetime of, I don't even know what that is. Who is Sisyphus push the boulder up the hill? I don't know the example or the reference, but I understand what you're saying. Anyone pushing a boulder up a hill. It's a really hard place to be for Vikings fans, because it's so often this kind of discussion of, well, your team got this close to something and then didn't. And all this week, you would have seen, had Jared Stidham won, you would have seen Nick Foles over and over and over again. Like another reminder of, hey, you've had all those years yourself with almost getting there. And then Nick Foles does it as the backup quarterback, even though you're kind of the team as the Vikings that are defined by getting close with a bunch of backup quarterbacks, not the Eagles. And then the Eagles show up and actually win it with that backup quarterback. It does seem to be always someone else. Now, I always think that when people ask me, because I will get this question from time to time, like, do you think the Vikings will ever win a Super Bowl? My answer is always yes, because I think that just from an odds perspective, it just makes sense to me that if you keep having, X number of opportunities, that you're going to get there eventually, right? That if you just have enough chances, enough swings at it, enough good seasons, that eventually you will win a Super Bowl. You're around for a long time. You're one of the winningest teams, or the winningest team that hasn't won one. And, Philadelphia had that for a long time. And New Orleans had that for a long time. So why not you? Like, why wouldn't that click for you at some point? So I'll always say that. Like, there's no reason to think, unless you believe in curses, that the Vikings can't do it. But as you sit here today and see somebody that was your quarterback for last year and played so well for you last year in the Super Bowl, it's hard to look down the road. And I think that this is the toughest spot with the Vikings and Vikings fans, both, in terms of this fix, is to look into the future and say, well, this could happen and they could win it. And it always does seem like it's a little around the corner with the Vikings, where one year it's miserable and the next year it's good. And who the heck could ever explain why, right? I mean, you have the way that things have gone, right? 2016 is miserable. 2015 is really good. 2017 is good. 2018 is miserable. 2019 is good, right? Just this ping-ponging back and forth all the time, from this quarterback played really well this year, but then he didn't the next year, and the yada, 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 over and over again. You're always one of those times getting the right matchup and having it work away from actually getting there. And if you are looking at this landscape of what happened this year, I think you gotta look at the Patriots and go, well, that team had 4 wins last year. And then they got the Chargers coming across the country and playing in the weather, with a quarterback who had no offensive tackles and no run game, and they beat them. Then they have the snow where CJ Stroud totally melts down and just throws them the ball all the time. And then they go to Denver. They play a backup quarterback who chest passes them the football. They score one touchdown, and they're going to the Super Bowl. And that's how random this can be. That's why it is incredible that the Vikings have not been in so long, but it also shows you how close you are if you can get into the dance and if you're there and if you have a Super Bowl caliber team, which is always important to me. It's not just get in the playoffs, it's have a Super Bowl caliber team, because there's lots of people get in the playoffs and don't have a Super Bowl caliber team. We've seen Vikings teams like that before. C. Bake says, if the Vikings miss the playoffs this year and JJ can't stay healthy, do you see any scenario in which the Wilfs fire Kwesi and Kevin, or do you think it's more likely they are a package deal? Or do you mean like, oh, I think you meant to type maybe not Kevin? Yeah, I think that you brought him in together, you extended him together, you should decide together. That's how I look at it. But as we've seen from the Buffalo Bills, I mean, sometimes somebody wins the power battle. And I would think of the two, considering how much it costs to pay a head coach not to work. That's a factor. How difficult it is to find a head coach who can do the job versus a general manager. I think it's much more difficult to find a head coach, as you've seen across the league with these coaching searches. Does Arizona have a coach yet? Todd Monken just got hired by the Cleveland Browns, and you're like, oh, okay, I guess. I mean, I have no problem with the man, but I mean, that's not exactly the hire you're looking for. Arizona doesn't know who they're hiring. The Raiders might hire Clint Kubiak, which I think Clint has sort of earned it this year, but never struck me as a guy who was going to be necessarily a head coach. But here we are. Do you want to move away from somebody who has put your team in a position to be competitive consistently is really the question. And that's a very hard decision. But if you miss the playoffs again, and whether McCarthy's healthy or not, or whoever's playing quarterback, if you miss the playoffs again, it does become a pretty tough conversation, because how much time do you need? And it also feels like it ran to the end of something, to where you started out in 2022 and you did the whole competitive rebuild and you drafted your quarterback and you got all your players in free agency, and here are the results. And if the results are in and they're not positive, then what do you do there? Do you just say, all right, we're going to give this? And there are teams who have done this. Cincinnati did this with Marvin Lewis, but do you get to tear it down, build it up, tear it down, build it up again? I mean, it just doesn't happen very often in the NFL. Marvin Lewis is the example I could think of where he got there with, Carson Palmer, and then they took that team down and they got back to being a highly competitive team with Andy Dalton and stayed there for a few years when their roster peaked and so forth. And he didn't get a third chance to build it up and tear it down. But I mean, can you think of too many coaches who get to ride the wave of, all right, you come in and your expectations are very high from the ownership to outdo Mike Zimmer, and they did. And then, all right, now we're going to, go down back in 23 and rebuild it. And they get a bunch of free agents to work out in 24. And then now you're at a point where the roster is still very, very good and capable of competing next year, but you don't, after all the money that's been spent and after all the effort and after all the working together and everything else. It's just hard to see. And I don't think that there should be end bosses when it comes to football seasons to decide, all right, if this happens, you're gone. If this happens, you stay. Like, you talk about process and results. That's do you have a good process here with your coach or not? And if you don't, then you should get rid of him. And if you do, then you should ride it through, because it takes think about how many, it takes 10 years worth of NFL games to get one Major League Baseball season in terms of sample size of games. So everything that they do in the NFL is insanely small sample size. If you were to give every coach 10 years and every regime 10 years, you would end up with wildly different results than you do. And probably you'd end up with a lot more teams building slowly, being more patient, being less reactionary, all those things. But now, I mean, if you're treating this year like, hey, if it doesn't work out, you guys are gone, then I would expect to see some very reactionary type of moves as opposed to long-term thinking. And when you talk about drafting a center, like that's something that feels like they have to do. And then we're in deja vu land of drafting Garrett Bradbury because it feels like something you have to do. Sorry, that was just one question, but I went on for a while. Mama says the Hall of Fame process needs to change. Here's my problem with what happened with Bill Belichick is that the voters were put in a position to where they had to decide. And of course, like they're wrong. Come on. I mean, what am I telling you anything you don't know? Do you want me to be more outraged than the next person yelling into a microphone about football today? But what I don't understand is the voters, the 50 voters who were voting on the old school people, Ken Anderson, Roger Craig, there's one more. They had to pick 3 out of 5. Why do you have to pick 3 out of 5? Why can't it be 5 out of 5? Why can't, and it sounds like the people who did not vote for Belichick, Spygate was a big deal for them. They never let it go. Maybe in the back of their minds, what happened with Brady going to Tampa Bay and winning was there. I don't know. That's possible. Maybe they all are sick of Bill Belichick and his girlfriend or all that. I don't know. You know, I've only seen one person actually come out and say they didn't vote for him. I haven't read that article yet. I saw it pop up just before I started the show of like, here's a guy who didn't vote for, Bill Belichick. Like, okay, well, that's insane, but sure, fine. I'm sure your article's good, but that's nuts. But why can't you have all of them in? Why can't you have Ken Anderson, Roger Craig, Bill Belichick, and whoever else it was all go in? Are they all deserving or not? Shouldn't it be yay or nay? And what I really don't understand, and Mike Sando's been on the show. I'm a big fan of Mike Sando. He's been explaining a lot of this process. He has referred multiple times to Deion Sanders making a comment about how, well, we need to raise the bar. We can't water down the Hall of Fame. So they just did. So we just changed the process because Deion said so. What? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Not everyone's going to be Deion. If the only way you get into the Hall of Fame is if you're Deion, or there's, I guess, no way to get coaches into the Hall of Fame these days because Belichick's not in, and neither is Mike Shanahan, which is freaking insane. And apparently, I found out this, I did not even realize this until a Packers person pointed out that Holmgren's not in. I mean, that is just on crack. Like that, this is insane. You were talking about the best of the best, but this is a place that's kept out Jim Marshall all these years. So that tells you everything you need to know about their process. Only the best of the absolute best. What? So we're only going to put in Joe Montana, Deion Sanders, and Walter Payton, and then that's it? Lawrence Taylor, Reggie White, and that's it? That's the whole Hall of Fame? Well, have a great time visiting Canton, everybody. This is a theme park, guys. Do you understand this? This is a theme park. It is a theme park for football fans to go in and go, wow, football history. Let's look at all the great players. Hey, mommy, where's Jim Marshall? Everyone in Minnesota says he was the captain and played more games than anybody else as a part of legendary, iconic teams. Oh, I'm sorry, he's not here. He didn't make enough Pro Bowls for them to vote for him. You know, I guess Shedeur Sanders will track him down soon for Pro Bowls, which shows you what the hell that's worth. I mean, it doesn't make much sense to keep great, wonderful, iconic players who fans adored during their careers out. And I'm not saying it's just popularity. I'm saying deserving people who meet the markers of the Hall of Fame, who they've decided, no, we need only Reggie White and only Deion Sanders. And that's it. It's Peyton Manning or shut up. But that's weird because they put in like Terrell Davis after he played 2 seasons. So it's just like, who can ever figure these people out? But what I know for darn sure is that it needs a change. It definitely needs a change. Jeff Hosteller. I love when people are responding to something from like a while ago because I've ranted and raved, and then I just see the name Jeff Hostetler and I think, yeah, Jeff Hostetler. Go back and watch that Super Bowl. Somehow, Jeff Hostetler holds on to a football in the end zone and takes a safety that saves the game for the Giants. Bruce Smith hits his arm. He holds on to it. It's one of the best plays in history, a guy taking a safety, but it's incredible. Lenny says, I think moving on from Sam Darnold was the wrong decision made for the right reasons. Yeah, I see what you mean by that. If you mean that their reason was that they felt that they were really chasing the Super Bowl with the rookie quarterback contract and that they really did like a lot that they saw from JJ McCarthy and they felt that they had nailed the draft pick, that I can buy as what you're saying is like the right broader reasons. Now, that's a forest and trees thing because once you start getting into the weeds of the decision and the risk that was involved with the decision, everybody loves a risk until it blows up in your face. And what were really the odds of this actually working? Was it foreseeable or not? I mean, the answer is, yeah, of course it was, because there were people in the building who foresaw it working out this way. So it's not like it was this impossible stroke of bad luck. It was a sub 50% chance that it was going to work, I think, or that, I mean, it was probably greater than 50% that Sam Darnold would have continued to be good, and less than 50% when we look at the bust rate. I mean, you are talking about QB5, but QB6 was in the playoffs this year. So I don't know how relevant that is, but even just the bust rate of first round quarterbacks, right, is probably like 50-50. And then you're talking about the bust rate of guys who threw under 800 passes is higher than that because your sample size you're working with is so small. And then it's somebody who had to relearn how to throw in January and be ready to lead a team later in the year. Like those things. So yes, like wrong decision for right reasons. Like yes, their reasons are understandable, but it almost felt like we're moving there regardless of what happens. Unless Sam wins the game, then we're not. And I think that's the problematic. That's where you get to, I'm not sure anyone can beat that point. When you say, here's my issue. If Sam Darnold beats the Rams in this one single game under very bizarre circumstances and the worst possible matchup, if he plays well, then we keep him. And if he goes, or if he struggles, then he goes. I mean, that's not really the way to do something. And yet it's hard to argue that that's not how it was done. Oak Dog says, gonna be sad days, lonely nights for Vikings fans. Time to sing the blues and drown in our own misery. Yeah. I know you're kidding, Oak Dog, but there is a lot of that that has gone on in Viking fan history, unfortunately. Jerry says the Vikings will miss the playoffs with McCarthy next season. KOC looking for another job, and Flores will be his replacement. I predict the future. So I did say the other night, I said, because somebody asked about, hey, if they do that, would, Brian Flores take over? And my thought was, I don't think so. I mean, that's usually when you make a regime change, that doesn't happen. And then the Buffalo Bills did it. The Buffalo Bills did exactly what I said rarely happens, which it does. I mean, there was a time where I think it was the Bucs fired their head coach and made their offensive coordinator Dirk Cutter the coach. But it doesn't happen a whole lot where you get rid of somebody and then you go to another coordinator, and then the Bills did it. And this is another point about, firing KOC if it doesn't go right this year. When you look around, ask yourself how many fan bases are super pumped about their new coach. I mean, maybe the Ravens, Steelers fans are apoplectic. The Browns fans are baffled because I think they thought it was going to be Jim Schwartz getting another chance. It seems like there's a lot of people who are just confused, and Buffalo fans are beside themselves. Wait a minute. You just got rid of Sean McDermott to change nothing? To have the same offense, to have the same people in charge, to have the same general manager who didn't think wide receivers were important and yelled at the radio hosts and stuff? Like, what? Why would that be? Why would you stick to the exact same process there? You talk that's the word of the day. But why would you stick to the same exact thing? So that's confusing right there. But it is an example because I said, I can't think of too many times it's happened. And then it happened right after that. But I still, I think that this is something I haven't talked a lot about on the show because it's so hard to know exactly what to make of it. The Mike Pettin comments about Brian Flores saying that they didn't, if you guys missed it, he was on an interview in Cleveland and he said they didn't see eye to eye. I talked about it a little bit at the end of the show the other night, but it's hard to know exactly what to do with something like that because people not seeing eye to eye is nothing new in a work environment. I've had it in the past. I used to work at McDonald's. I didn't get along with every manager. Wherever you work, I bet you have people internally that you don't get along with. And yet, when you start to see a pattern, then you definitely wonder, is there something more there than just your typical, this person doesn't get along with that person? At the same time, the Vikings just made him one of the highest paid coordinators in the league. So clearly they chose their path for who they want in the building when it comes to Brian Flores. But I think that, as Stephon Diggs once said, there's truth to all rumors. There is probably truth behind the way that Brian Flores operates is not for everybody. And I've heard that, for players before. Like some players will throw themselves in front of a bus for Brian Flores and they love him and they think this is Stephon Gilmore, I know, said that he enjoyed the heck out of playing for Flores. He tweeted about it, and there have been a lot of players, and we talk about Harrison Smith and his appreciation for Flores all the time. And then there are other players and other coaches who that has just not been their same experience. And there are some people that are kind of divisive like that. But at the end of the day, everyone getting along versus everyone having a top 5 defense, which one of those things is more valuable? I think they chose. They chose what they thought was more valuable for next season. So Brian Flores is going to be here. But that reputation that follows him not disappearing. I also think, though, that Mike Pettin's comments, because I saw a few people be like, oh, yeah, well, where did Pettin's defenses rank? Like, hey, I was in Buffalo when Pettin was in Buffalo, and I wasn't surprised when KOC hired him. And I know his reputation. It's really good. It's a really, really good reputation. A lot of people look up to Mike Pettin. He's been responsible for a lot of people's careers. You're hearing about Grant Udinski a lot. Mike Pettin was the guy who introduced Grant Udinski to KOC. Like, he's responsible for a lot of coaches being in this league and having success. So, his character shouldn't be questioned here just because he said, I don't see eye to eye with Brian Flores and I worked on the opposite side of the ball. I know that people always want to side, or a lot of times side with the team, but it's wrong to question Mike Pettin because he didn't get along with somebody. But they chose their path, and they'll probably have a great defense again with Brian Flores, and how they get there might not be for everyone. That's how I would put that. But tying back to what you said about, firing KOC and making Flores the head coach, I think that when Mike Pettin says something like that, when you have the Tua comments, when you have the Fitzpatrick comments, when you have the lawsuit, like, you start to pile up enough where you go, I just don't know that's going to happen. I just don't know that anyone's going to say, when you have some of your testimonials love and some of your testimonials go very strongly the other way, that a franchise or even the Vikings are going to say, all right, we're going to put you in charge of the entire building. And I think that in general, like, if they were going to do that, they'd be looking for a lot of tear down also at that point, which I don't know if you want to stick with that, but maybe I'm not there. I'm not there all the way to the end of next year. And you'd have to know exactly what it looked like. If you had the number 1 defense and the 28th ranked offense again, maybe the story is different. I don't know. But I did laugh because I was just saying, hey, that doesn't really happen very often. And then it did. If you didn't answer the FanDuel question of the day, by the way, Sam Darnold is the favorite for MVP at plus 110 on FanDuel. Are you rooting for him? Or are you going to have to sort of watch through fan fingers because it's tough? Carl says, I think what frustrates me most about the process is it's pretty easy to see why it was a bad decision, but we were fed so much about how ready JJ was. I think that is a very, very fair comment, Carl. I think that's a very, very fair comment. When you call him the franchise quarterback, when you talk nonstop about how mature, how ready, how prepared, how football IQ, all this sort of stuff. And then when you make a move that's this bold, you also just insinuate that this person is very, very ready to be the starting quarterback. And every time it's asked about any concerns of, well, aren't you worried that he's taking on all this pressure and everything else? And it's kind of like, oh, well, look. And I know you could say, well, what do you want him to say? And that's fair. But it was like, look, we know this guy. And Mark Wilf said that to us and everybody in charge. Like we've seen it behind the scenes. We know things you don't know. And that's why I don't mean to be insulting when I make the McCarthy crack. It's not really so much about him. It's about exactly what you're talking about. Like, this quarterback has a lot of talent and he has the capability, I think, to start in the NFL. And we've seen some of that, but that doesn't mean that he is impervious to the realities and the truths of the NFL. And the truths of the NFL is that guys that are that inexperienced just rarely succeed right away. And here's the Packers again. And I know that, Jordan Love hasn't won the Super Bowl, so he must be terrible, but he's good. And he developed over a couple years. If Jordan Love was thrown in year one, would he be good? If he had missed all of year one and thrown in year two, even on a good team with Jordan Love, it took Jordan Love, after 3 years of development, half the season to figure out how to play. And yet you thought that it's like the laws of physics don't apply to me. They thought that they could set it up. So, if you've ever watched The Matrix, when he does the jump and they think like, oh, if he's the one, he's going to jump to the other side and then he falls. It's like, oh yeah, this is hard, right? And even the one has to learn. The Matrix, a very relevant and fresh reference. I did watch one of the films that is nominated for Best Picture. I watched F1 with Brad Pitt. It was cool. I enjoyed it. But the most recent references I could come up with for films are usually from about 1998. So that's what I came up with. The point just being that if Neo can't jump to the other side, then quarterbacks can't either. And that it takes development, it takes growth, and it takes time for quarterbacks who are 24 and have thrown 1,500 passes. Bo Nix was not perfect right away, and he had so much more experience than JJ McCarthy. So that is one of those, they created this, he's impervious to all of that, and he's the one that's, must be, they never said better than Sam, but they must like what he brings and the economic element in some ways better than Sam. I remember that there were fans who would come into the comments, and I'm not criticizing those people for being excited, but they'd be like, yeah, well, McCarthy, when he's in there, he won't be a choker because he won the national championship. And it's like, guys, we don't know anything about what he's going to be like when he gets in there. And it almost felt like they did that to themselves as well. Like, they built him up in ways that were not even fair to him, because in an ideal world for him, he would have been Cam Ward this year. He would have played a bunch of games for a team that didn't have expectations and developed and then grown and been ready for his second year as a starter. But that's what I mean about the laws of physics, where historically there's not that many rookie quarterbacks who come right in and shine. And usually if they do, they've got a lot of previous experience. K-Skull says if they miss the playoffs again, both are gone. At that point, the culture won't matter and Kwesi will have built the roster. Yeah, that's what's fair, is when we talk about it this way, is if you probably get one true roster build. You probably don't get two without playoff wins. Now, if you have playoff wins, then you could say, hey, we did it once. That's like, San Francisco had a couple of setback years. They were not great last year, 2024. They were not great in, what year did Jimmy get hurt? Jimmy Garoppolo. Was it 2020? Maybe 2021? 2020, whatever year it was, 2019, must have been 2019, whatever year it was that Jimmy Garoppolo got injured. trying to think which one that was. If that was 2019, or 2018, must have been 2018, right? 2019, he was really good. So in 18, Jimmy Garoppolo gets hurt. They go to the bottom. They draft Nick Bosa. I think I may be muddling my years, but I know that they had to start Nick Mullins for an extended portion of time, and they didn't win that many games, but they had built up some credibility there. And then you have a year that's a setback like last year, and you're not thinking about changing regimes because you've built up the credibility of, well, you guys can build a team that goes to the Super Bowl and give yourself a chance. So, we think you could do that again. You deserve that. I mean, the Rams had a setback year after Stafford went and won the Super Bowl, but of course you won the Super Bowl. So let's give them another try at rebuilding it. If you end up walking out with, let's just say your reset year was 2023. You walk out with a 14-win season, then a 9, and then an 8 or something. Well, that's really not what you invested all that money for and all that time into, was that type of roster build. Now, overall, I think they've done a good job with the roster build. Have they hit on as many draft picks? Of course, we've been over that a million times, and the answer is no. But they have hit on a lot of free agents, and they have produced, when healthy on the offensive line, it was good. On the defensive side, when it got healthy and got Van Ginkel back and Harrison Smith, it was extremely good. The kicker, it matters these days how good your kicker is. And they drafted the best one in the league. And so you've got a lot of things going for you on the roster. But ultimately, if you can't maximize it because you can't find the next quarterback or develop JJ McCarthy, your roster build is not going to be worth the paper it's written on. And it also does not have much more of a window after this. You have Jefferson under contract, but things get dicey. You have Darrisaw under contract, and they're hoping and praying, I'm sure, that Christian Darrisaw could come back 100% healthy. But, you get into 2027 now, then you're talking about a lot of guys being on the other side or contracts running out, or there's going to have to be a lot of roster turnaround at that point. And who's going to do it? If you have playoff wins, win. If you have a reason to say we've done a good job with this and we're going in the right direction, well, yeah, you're going to sign up for more. But if you don't, then you're going to make a change because that's how it works. Mark asking about what are the chances if they falter that Flores becomes the next coach. I just think it would be kind of low. I would never rule anything out, but I don't think it's very high. Carl says, I put reason aside and put my faith in the staff and their more informed opinion. And then the GM says, well, it was incomplete data. Oh, great. Well, you're kind of speaking my language there, Carl, because when we talked about this last year, a lot of what I said was after they made the decision. So I remember going to the combine and I really got the sense they were moving on from Darnold. It sounded like they were trying to see if anyone would trade for him, and they were just not talking like they were going to extend him at all. So I was like, okay, or franchise tag him at all. So I was like, okay, well, if that's what they're doing, they must really believe in this. And then when we asked them, that was what we got back. And so I felt the same way. Carl were like, well, if they're saying to us, we're going to make this extremely bold decision because we really believe in this. All right, well, that must mean that they've seen something that we don't know about from McCarthy. And we did see his 2024 camp, which was good. And we did see that preseason game, which was good. But they must have seen great stuff behind the scenes and really bought in. And that's how you believe in that decision. And that's how you end up saying, hey, it was the right call because they really bought into him. But whatever they saw did not translate. And then when you get to sort of concerns about was he mature enough to handle it, that's where it was really surprising. But the thing is, what they didn't factor is the Mike Tyson thing. Everybody's got to play until they get punched in the face. Everybody as a quarterback can seem great until they actually get hit. I mean, the Jaron Hall thing, right? Poor Jaron Hall. Sorry to take a swipe at him. But Jaron Hall, in practice, got the opportunity to start, and he goes out, and the first drive, he tries to run into the end zone and doesn't protect himself and just gets knocked out. And you're like, yeah, this is the NFL, bro. This is what it's like, man. It's like that. It's that violent. And you can look good in practice, but that you can't practice because otherwise everyone would just be in the hospital. You can't practice that. You can't practice what it's like to have your fourth offside call or false start call, and then the fans are booing and the coaches are screaming at you and you're losing and you're frustrated and everyone's looking at you saying, what the heck's going on? That's a feeling you can't simulate behind the scenes watching VR. They don't put that one in the VR thing. So that's what's also hard. And we have to accept that they thought, like, they maybe didn't think about that enough. Oak Dog says JJ is going to be what we've seen him to be, probably. Probabilistically, you're right. However, Sam Darnold's in the Super Bowl. Sam Darnold was 21-35 with a 78.5 quarterback rating before he got to Minnesota. 21-35 with a 78.5 quarterback. I mean, that's terrible. So when you talk about probably, yeah, I always am looking for comparables, history, what examples we can use, similarities. They're not good. The similarities are not good. When maybe the best that I could come up with is like a Ryan Tannehill, but just because history doesn't speak well of the situation doesn't mean that it has to be predictive, because when it comes to Sam Darnold, history, you had to look really close. And if you did, you could kind of find it with Darnold, like when he actually did have things right for him. The end of 2022 was a lot of good, and how he played in San Francisco was a lot of good in a very, very small sample. But there were moments, there were times where you saw it, and I would say the same thing for JJ McCarthy, where there's moments and times where you saw it. So it doesn't have to be over just because the history of quarterbacks drafted in his range who have played this way through 10 games, none of them have really worked out. Doesn't have to mean that's going to happen. It's just the probability is not pushed toward it working out. And that's why they're going to have competition. And we're going to find out by their actions just how much they do or do not think it can work out. Because if they sign Joe Flacco or Gardner Minshew or something, well, then that must mean they think that it is going to work out in Buck history. But if they go get Kyler Murray or trade for Mac Jones, then they don't think it's going to work out, or get Kirk back. Jim says at this point, Sam is a non-issue. The issue now is, where do the Vikings go by now? Trading for a top 10 quarterback is unlikely. So what non-top 10 quarterbacks can they target other than Murray? Hey, you're taking my best option. Yeah, I mean, what other quarterbacks would give you a real chance? Not just what other quarterbacks you can get, but which one? This is where Mac Jones does make the most sense, because he's actually been to the playoffs and played for a winning team in San Francisco. But of course, you have to trade for him. That makes life harder. They did make a trade for Jordan Mason last year. Jordan Mason's good. So it's not like San Francisco's never given anybody away. Of course, in their press conference at the end of the year, they were like, we're not trading Mac Jones. More like, if you want Mac Jones, you're going to have to pony up. And that's kind of the issue. Like, are you trading a second round pick for him? No, I don't think you could do that. A third round pick, yeah, maybe. Maybe a third round pick would be fair. But are they giving away Mac Jones when they have a good backup quarterback and a quarterback in Brock Purdy who has been banged up? Well, I'm not sure that makes a lot of sense for San Francisco, so they don't have to do it. They're not required by law, since they have a good backup to trade him to you. So then we get to that free agent list, and it's like Jimmy Garoppolo, Kirk's probably going to get cut. Russell Wilson. I don't think you'd want to do the Russell Wilson thing. And you talk about a guy who is not going to fit, seeing the middle of the field, doesn't ever really want to throw there. Jameis Winston would be preposterous. I mean, at least that would be entertaining, but it'd be kind of silly. So is there an answer there when it comes to a fix? Then you start to talk about, well, what about a Malik Willis? Because the Malik Willis discussion is actually one of the more intriguing ones, Now, everyone's got him going to Miami, and he very well might because he could start in Miami. But if there isn't anyone who actually thinks he's a starter because he played so little, then that's competition. Plus, if he wins the job, he might be really good. Or if he does not win the job, then fine. Well, you could trade him away or have him be your backup. I tend to think that there's going to be a team that really wants to go in on him. So is there another backup around the league? Because it used to actually happen all the time where a team would develop a quarterback and they would have them as their backup. And then somebody else would kind of like what they saw and trade for that guy and make them their starter. It happened all the time in the NFL. It really doesn't happen that often now. So is there a backup somewhere around the league that's on the younger or inexperienced side that KOC likes? Now here would be funny if they traded for Drew Lock and then he took them to the NFC Championship game, right? Like Sam Darnold's backup comes to Minnesota or something. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, Jimmy G can probably run the offense, but the guy hasn't played a whole season in years. Tom Brady, does he want to play? The names just don't really come easily. See, Doomer says, too bad I can't enjoy the Sam Darnold story as a neutral fan. That dude is so mentally strong. Good for him going to a better team with better fans and better coaching. Well, I don't know about better fans. They have really good fans. I think Vikings have really good fans as well. The FanDuel question of the day, by the way, was that Sam Darnold is plus 110 to win Super Bowl MVP. Are you rooting for him? Or is it too hard to root for him? Lenny says we wouldn't have won the Super Bowl with Sam Darnold this year, but we would have won 12 to 13 games. So those two things are conflicting, my friend. Because historically speaking, this was one of my favorite projects I ever did, was I tried to figure out what the bar of entry is. Like, what is the passcode to get into, hey, you can actually win the Super Bowl? Are you a real Super Bowl contender? Because we tend to do it in kind of a nebulous way of, well, they're a real Super Bowl contender because they have the quarterback, or they're a real Super Bowl contender because their record was this. So I tried to figure out, well, what is that bar really? And in the 16 game era, it was 11 wins. It's probably 12 now, but I guess, I had to blur some of that. So let's just call it 11 wins. Usually you had to rank at least 7th to 9th to 10th offensively, but definitely top 10 offense for sure. You had to be a top half of the league defense. Now, recently, there's been some really impressive defenses. Atlanta 2016 threw that off. No, 2016. They threw it off because their defense was horrible and they made the Super Bowl in 2016. But still, the point being that you can be a little less great on defense. The Patriots this year during the regular season were not perfect on defense. They were more of an above average, but you can't be terrible. You normally cannot be terrible on defense. Almost nobody makes the Super Bowl if you're terrible. And you normally have to outscore your opponents by 100 points or more. There's very few examples of teams making the Super Bowl if they did not outscore their opponents by 100 points. So if the Vikings this year offensively scored 90 more points, that would have got them to plus 100. And when you think about Sam Darnold and how he played last year, how he played for Seattle, 90 points gets you to about 430 on the year, which is not even close. That's like almost 100 points less than the Rams. So it's not like some outrageous number. 430 points would get you into like the top 10 of scoring. Could you have gotten there with Darnold as your quarterback? The answer is probably. And if you get to 12 wins, then you've got a chance. And then I could go through all these different paths throughout history that you could point to and be like, this team got to play a game. My favorite is Philadelphia 2022, where the third string quarterback, where they almost had to put Christian McCaffrey in a quarterback, where the 49ers were down so bad, their quarterback with a torn UCL in his arm was playing because they had nothing else. And then they went to the Super Bowl because of it. Like, that's where your path, if you can win 12 or 13 and then you get the right path, then you could get there. So, to say, well, we definitely wouldn't have, I don't know. It depends on the path. It depended on the path last year. Even when you think about, the Vikings 2017, They didn't have to play the first week, and then they get New Orleans, they get a miracle, and then they're one game away. All you need, like that's it. A miracle, play at the end of a game, and then there you are, like one game away. How about that for playoffs are so crazy, guys. The Philadelphia Eagles threw a pass against the Atlanta Falcons in 2017 that hit a defender like in the face and was caught by the Eagles guy for a first down. That if the defender catches it, Atlanta is the team that's playing the Vikings in Minnesota and not the Vikings traveling to Philadelphia. They're probably beating Atlanta and going to the Super Bowl. It's so random and so weird with the paths and how this works that if you could say, well, they probably would have won 12 games this year if they had Darnold, then to me, you got a chance. Then you probably would have met the barrier of entry. Oak Dog says maybe a new O-line coach will fix everything. Somebody had to get, as Jeremiah says, tossed into the volcano. But I think what's going to make their defense, what's going to make their offensive line better is just health next year. If they get a healthy center and then you don't have issues with Donovan Jackson throughout the year and he takes the next step. If Darrisaw's back and plays 15 games or something, and then, O'Neal had some issues with health. I think that had they been competitive, he would have battled through a little bit more. Well, I shouldn't say that because O'Neal battled through even when there were struggles, but maybe there were times where they took him out that if they were playing for a playoff spot, he would have kind of stayed in and they wouldn't have had a good case to pull him out of the game or something. But health matters a lot with that offensive line. I think when you look across the line at the Seattle Seahawks and the New England Patriots, you go, I don't see it. I do not see with these offensive lines the 1994 Cowboys. And yet they're in the Super Bowl. And I think a part of it is that they've just had healthy offensive lines in the playoffs. That's really helped them. And they were able to survive the Texans defense because CJ Stroud kept giving him the football. C-Bake says it'd be really interesting to know how split the decision in Darnold was inside TCO. Was Kevin more in the camp of keeping Darnold or starting JJ? I will, no matter what anybody says, I will never let Kevin O'Connell off the hook for the decision because he is the guy that got all the credit and built up all the cachet for Sam Darnold. He was the one that was coach of the year, was called the quarterback whisperer, that did every interview with it. And I'm not saying he shouldn't do every interview. He should, of course. He's the head coach of the football team. Like, it's part of the job. But he did every interview talking about how great their process was, how they got all their philosophies of how they took Sam Darnold to the next level and all that sort of stuff. And he built up the amount of belief in him that if he said, guys, there's no way I can let Sam Darnold out of this building, it's very hard for me to believe that they would not have said, okay, let's figure it out. Let's figure out how to keep him. If he was, and if you go back and listen to him at the combine, go back and listen to him call JJ McCarthy the franchise quarterback. Go back and listen to him talk after the decision and everything else. He's the guy. He's the former NFL quarterback who was brought here to be the quarterback guy. And you can't wash your hands from that and say it was Kwesi's fault. Now, do I think Kwesi was completely in on the decision? Yes, I do. Because this was the plan for all along, was the bigger picture plan was to draft a quarterback and spend. And that is a good plan, as we see from the New England Patriots. But it has to be executed. And that's where you're supposed to have those two things working together, is the bigger picture plan and the evaluation. And the evaluation was just wrong. And even the evaluation to draft McCarthy, if you want to win now quarterback versus Knicks, did not prove to be right. So I can't ever say, well, one person gets off the hook and the other person doesn't. No. They all made this together. And if the ship goes down, the ship goes down together. Now, you may have a situation where the Wilfs made the final call. And then in that instance, then maybe they wouldn't hold people responsible the same way. But they don't tend to be that way. Like, they tend to be listeners to their football people and make informed decisions based on what their football people are saying. That's how they've usually done it in the past. K-Skull, KOC was pretty quick to say that Darnold earned the right to be a free agent. Exactly. There are so many quotes that we could go back to and say, there's no way you can just wash your hands of that decision and say, it wasn't me. You are not Shaggy. You can't say it wasn't me because you're all involved. Nicholas says, I've seen a few channels saying that in his last 4 games, McCarthy was a top 15 quarterback. Do you know what his points DVOA was for those games? So I don't know what I have not, because if you're trying, when you think about those last 4 games and top 15, like, wow, congrats. If you think about those last 4 games, you played the worst defense in the NFL, the second worst defense in the NFL, half a game because you got hurt and half a game because you got hurt. I'm sorry that I'm not really moved by that. I mean, what amount of, how many snaps did he even take in the last 4 games? I was very impressed with JJ McCarthy in the Dallas game. That was the game that I would say, if you're trying to hang on to this, if you're trying to hang on to something there, that's okay, because there were flashes and there's athletic skill and there's arm strength and maybe there's resiliency. I guess we're going to find out. And there is work ethic there. And I don't doubt that JJ McCarthy is going to do everything he possibly can to improve. It's just, how do you do it that fast? Again, history's not kind to trying to get that much better that quick, but it has happened. But I think if you're trying to like reach and grab and twist and turn for, well, in the last 4 games, he ranked here by this. And if you just squeeze it a little and push it into this little box, then we can make it look like he made a big jump. But in those last 4 games, that was the dumb it down offense. That was the run first and don't use motions as much and big personnel. And again, and Dallas fired their DC, Washington fired their DC. The Giants didn't even have one at that point. The Packers played their backups. I mean, like, what are we talking about here? Is this going to tell us what they're going to do next year against the Chicago Bears when they play them at peak strength? Like, I don't think so. So I don't make much of it. I look at the biggest sample we have, which is 10 games. And those 10, because you can do this with a lot. I mean, I covered EJ Manuel. He's the guy I've brought up as comparable because I was there for that. You could take a run of Christian Ponder games and squeeze them into looking like something. You could take a run of EJ Manuel games. Like, these quarterbacks were not so horrific that every pass they threw was an interception. Like, there's reasons why these guys are first round draft picks. It's just that what those last 4 games do is show enough to think maybe there's more there, maybe. And I've never said he can't do it. And I've never said that they should trade him or get rid of him or he should never be allowed to hold the football ever again. It's just, what are the odds that the last 4 games being fine versus the competition suggests that there is a big blow up coming to the point where they can win 12 games next season? That's where it's hard to get to for me. So those stats are, not that useful, I think. Oak Dog, Seattle has a really good defense. They do. I think the Vikings had a really good defense as well. Was it quite as good as this defense? Probably not, no. Seattle's defense is better than the Vikings, but I mean, they're in the room together. They're in the ballpark together. And they were playing, I think at the end of the season, you want to talk about what it looked like the second half of the season when they got healthy. The Vikings, if they had good quarterback play or even decent, would have gone into the playoffs as one of the scariest teams in the NFL to face because of what they did to the Lions. The Lions had a good offense. What they did to Dallas on third downs, Dallas had a top offense and they took them apart. So they were playing that high of a level. Doomer KO, players who actually care about winning should be like Diggs and leave the Vikings. All right. Okay. I love that you changed your name to Doomer because that is how you're acting tonight. I think that the way players will look at this, and I cannot speak for guys, it's just a guess, is not that they don't like JJ McCarthy. I never got that sense from anyone. No one ever said anything in the locker room that made me think on, off the record, whispered, winked at me, or Kevin Seifert or anybody else that suggested they did not like JJ McCarthy or didn't think going into the season that it was going to work for him or whatever. They did. They did. I think they all felt like as the season went on, this is just a kid. This is just what happens with rookies. And Jeremiah Searles has said on the show before, like, freaking rookie, because rookies, young players, don't have the amount of knowledge or experience or scar tissue to deal with the things that come along in an NFL season. I think we saw that from JJ McCarthy, and then the injuries really stunk for him too. And I think everyone felt bad for him that he wasn't able to be out there for a full season. And I still think that had he been out there for a full season, if you get one more win, if you can grind one out in Pittsburgh, where that Pittsburgh offense was, okay against you, but the giveaways and the sacks really sunk them in that game. If you get one more there, if he's healthy for one more here or there, like, you get into the playoffs, and then it feels a lot different for JJ McCarthy. So there's that part of it too, that I think players felt really bad for McCarthy, but they also think that, and I did have someone say to me at some point, like, man, we've played pretty well in this game, and to lose the way we did because of, the quarterback play, the offense, is just so frustrating. And you could see it with Jefferson. It's just so frustrating. And last year, I think they all went, well, they made their decision. We're stuck with it. But next year, that's where you better correct your mistake. If you're the coaching staff, if you're the front office. Last year, all right, stuff happens. He wasn't ready. It is what it is. But it's not that if you go into next year and he's not ready, because now you already know, or at least you've seen that side of it. Drew says, what education level do you need to go into a season with two rookie non-proven quarterbacks? I don't know what you mean by education level. I mean, they had Carson Wentz was a proven quarterback. So is that, I'm not really sure I understand what you mean by that. But if you're referring to last year, I mean, they did have Wentz as a proven backup quarterback. I never like to make this about the backup quarterback, though, because there was never any suggestion of a quarterback competition. And now they can say, well, we really wanted Daniel Jones. And I believe you, but ifs and buts. And you didn't do anything else to suggest that you wanted a competition for JJ McCarthy, except for telling everyone that you wanted to have Daniel Jones. That's just not that compelling. Like, oh, well, we wished we had Daniel Jones. Oh, congratulations. But you didn't do anything else. You didn't bring in anyone else that would have pushed him or set a bar for him or potentially beat him out for a competition, because it felt like they didn't want anybody who could do that. And that's why they had Sam Howell. Let's see. Carl, we're fifth in wins and top 10 in win percentage with no ring. Of course, we're the what if fans. We're the biggest outlier in the sport. Yeah. Oh, I don't blame you. My point was, it strikes me how much that is. It sort of hits me on a day like, this week, days like this week, discussions like this week, how much of Vikings fans' existence is saying, what if this happened? What if that happened? What if that happened? And how it always feels like it's somebody else that has the thing like this happen to them, where Seattle fans are saying, can you believe this? Can you believe this happened to us? This is great. And talk about outliers. Seattle went to the Super Bowl with a 3rd round pick quarterback that wasn't even supposed to be their starter originally. It was supposed to be Matt Flynn. And then they go with a quarterback that was signed from elsewhere. How many times has that even happened? I mean, the Rams traded for Matthew Stafford, but most of the time, teams that go to the Super Bowl go with a guy that they drafted. And this is or they had to trade the guy they drafted in Jared Goff's case. So a really good quarterback had to go out to get Stafford. In this case, it's someone who they were just able to sign for free. Like, oh, okay, well, we'll just get you off the free agent heap. That does not happen very much. I would be curious about that. How many times a team has reached the Super Bowl by just signing a quarterback? Paul says, I think the week 2 injury really derailed things. He couldn't get in a rhythm, and KOC couldn't see what he's good at and adjust accordingly. Paul, you are the first rational person who has brought this up about Kevin O'Connell. And I'm not saying there's no other rational person about it, but I still hear from people of, well, KOC's just got the offense. He wants to throw all the time, and he just couldn't adjust to McCarthy. And then when you actually go through it and go, well, when was that supposed to happen? Because week 2, he's hurt. And in that game, in week 2, yes, I think he put too much on him in that game. I totally agree with you. And if they win that one by just running in with Jordan Mason, then maybe things in the season are different. And maybe they do make the playoffs. And who knows what we're talking about right now. But him getting hurt there. So that game, I think when you go back through it, you go, all right, you got to the goal line, you passed. And he was clearly thrown off and he fumbles the ball. And the biggest critique I had of that game was the strip sack where you get either a turnover or 4th down stop. I forget. It might have been a turnover. And the first thing you do is go empty with McCarthy, who's getting sacked like crazy. Is that really the way to do it? And so I think there were a lot of like micro criticisms there. But then he's gone for 5 weeks. And he comes back and the offense is different. Go to the Lions game. They run a lot. They throw screens. They hit a few passes downfield. McCarthy scrambles. He throws for 160 yards. They win the game. They did tighten up the offense at that point, and they won that game. And then when you get to Chicago, and then when you get to the Ravens game, well, they're playing from behind a lot in those games. So you rack up more passes, especially the Ravens game. That wasn't even, McCarthy turns the ball over, but it was the fumble on the kickoff that gets them behind. Then they've got to throw and throw and throw. And then they jump off side a million times or false start a million times. So then they have to go to what looked like an easier cadence, went to maybe less motions and stuff like that, that's a tourniquet. Like that's not a strategy. That's a tourniquet. That's just stopping the bleeding. That's not. So when was it supposed to happen that they were supposed, like you said, to understand what your quarterback can and can't see, can and can't do when your sample size is so small of a couple of quarters in Chicago, didn't throw that many passes, a game in Atlanta, which clearly KOC felt like he was not prepared to play after the birth of his son, since he's brought it up about 700 times. It's hard to adapt your offense around someone's skills when they're never playing. That's a good point there. And that week 2 injury, even if there had been rough times, even if the same outcomes happened where you get all of Carson Wentz's performances were JJ McCarthy's and he goes 2-3 in that stretch and there's some good and some bad, still you'd learn a lot. Still you would grow a lot in that time. And that's where with McCarthy, this is where I feel bad for him. And this whole thing with Darnold being in the Super Bowl is so unfair on him, is that just injuries, something you cannot control, have started and stopped and started and stopped his career. And this is where I use the Anthony Richardson. I still think someday Anthony Richardson's going to be fine and is going to start again and will play for a team, but he's got to be a backup. Well, somehow he hurt himself as a backup. He's got to be a backup for years. He's got to learn how to play and then come back when he's actually ready, like Geno Smith did, or Sam Darnold. Darnold spent a year as a backup, and those years I think can really help. But can you make JJ a backup for a year and then bring him back in as a starter? I think if the year was 1993, you could. I don't know, in the year 2026, you can. Nicholas says, hindsight's 2020. Most fans wanted Sam gone last year. I suspect this may be the case where the Wilfs made the choice based on the image and fan feedback. Hopefully not. Hopefully that wasn't. Hopefully it was based on their quarterback whisperer in the building and not based on fan feedback. But when you say hindsight is 2020, it's the same thing as process over results, where you're like, well, but also, could we have seen it at the time that this could potentially happen? And based on Darnold's season in 2024, based on the lack of play from JJ McCarthy, if I told you this at the beginning of the year, hey, I went forward in time, Sam Darnold's in the Super Bowl and the Vikings are 9-8 and McCarthy only played 10 games, got hurt and really struggled, I don't think you would have been shocked. He won 14 games for the Vikings last year. You wouldn't have been like, oh my gosh, that's the craziest thing I've ever heard. Well, it wasn't. It wasn't the craziest thing you ever heard. And I think the struggle for me to get past, there's sort of in this discussion, I get to these walls and then I can't like move past those walls in the conversation. And the franchise tag giving you the chance to evaluate JJ and have Sam Darnold back is the wall I can't break through, because it always made sense to me like you could split the difference. And they didn't want to do that. Now, maybe because the fans were so sold, and the fans don't, to me, I never blame the fans for any decision a team makes, ever. Because you're not making the millions of dollars. If you are, then I will criticize you. They're the ones that are making the millions of dollars to make the right decisions, not you. So you don't get criticized for that. Plus, you and your opinions are shaped by what they say and do based on their expertise, right? So it's not your fault. You're not the one that should get blamed for not seeing it coming or this potential for this coming. K Skull says safety, corner, nose tackle, and center. There you go for how to fix it. Safety is at the top of my list. Corner, I'm really interested in. Can you draft one? It's not a bad idea. It seems like every mock is headed that way. Nose tackle, yeah, I agree with you on nose tackle. I just don't know if you want to spend a high draft pick on a nose tackle considering where you're at. Could you get one in the third? Could you get one in free agency? Probably. C. Bake says, I think it's entirely possible KOC let the quarterback guru's steam get to his head and overestimated his ability in propping up a young quarterback. Sam's year in San Francisco can't be overlooked in his development. So that is a very rational point. And you're right. Sam Darnold will say that too about his year in San Francisco. That's what I mean by believing that they were the exception to the rule. It's not just KOC himself and his ability to coach him up, but I also think they thought that Jefferson, Addison, Hawkinson, Darisaw, O'Neal, getting Will Fries, like all those things would give them a much, much better chance at success than other teams. But again, sort of missed the reality there, which is if your quarterback's not ready, and if some of those people are suspended, hurt, you don't get a training camp with them, the chaos that ensued, and also just how much can you teach of fundamentals in a very short amount of time. I've been told many times by people in the NFL and former players that it is not a development league. It is not you get in as a young player and you slowly build your way up and they help you along and they teach. No way. These guys are here to win games. Whoever is, if whoever's ready and the best is get out there and play, and you have to develop yourself. But he didn't really have time to develop himself because he was injured and rehabbing. And he just picked up where he started and not where he left off. He was sent kind of back to square one, like it's a game of, I don't know, sorry, I guess, go back to the start. That's kind of what happened to him when he got hurt. I think they thought that he would just begin at the same square, but instead he went back to the first square. And then he had to relearn it all. And then he gets into the games and the mechanics are just not NFL caliber. It was not NFL caliber throwing when he got in at the beginning of the season. And it probably started to look more like it at the end, but still really wasn't. It just was not of a caliber that's going to win you games consistently in the NFL unless you have Vince Young's legs. Then you might be able to win some games, but he doesn't have that. Lenny says the only things that would make the decision right would be getting an established star quarterback or McCarthy taking a leap to being a top 10 quarterback next year. That would be the fix. That would be the fix, yes. If And now top 10 doesn't have to mean presently top 10. It can mean you make the person top 10. It can mean you develop them into being top 10, or you coax them into with your offense being top 10. But if you don't have performance from a quarterback that's at least in the top 15, you're not really competing. And 15 is probably stretching it. And that's why I do talk about Murray, because that's the only guy who I could say has actually done that, that's available and is not a million years old. Because Kirk has done that many times, but can he do it now? Rodgers has not only done that, but he's been to the top of the mountain, but can he do it now? Who else? That's why I bring up Willis. Willis has the talent and has been trained by Matt LaFleur. Maybe your best offer there for Willis is better than somebody else's best offer, because you could say, would you like to play with Justin Jefferson, my friend? As opposed to a rebuilding Miami team, as opposed to a rebuilding, I don't know, Cardinals team. You could play for a team that's just right over here, that's actually good. So there might be something there to Malik Willis that I haven't really dove deep into that idea as much. But maybe I should bring that up more often, or Daniel Jones coming back, I guess. I don't know what his story is if he wants to stay in Indianapolis. They kept the same leadership that brought him in. I'm assuming he's going back there. But I don't know. Maybe he could be coaxed back to Minnesota. Maybe I need to get more into the Willis idea. Because when you think about it, the talent is there, the development is there, and that's a player who has the potential to have a ceiling. Like I talk about Murray because there's a ceiling there. There's potential there. But I think there is for Willis too. In a very small sample size, he's shown it and he's got the physical skills. It would be whether Willis would want to compete with someone or whether he would want to be locked in as a starter, because McCarthy would at least have his chance to compete with him. Could you convince Malik Willis that this is the best place for him because you could get Justin Jefferson, assuming Jordan Addison is still here, Addison, etc., improvement in the backfield, similar coaching to Matt LaFleur. I don't know. It's possible I need to get more into that idea. Jacoby says, I'm rooting for Sam personally. He did nothing wrong. Sail Dog says, yes, I'm rooting for him. Doomer says, I've already got a FanDuel bet on Darnold for Super Bowl MVP. That was the FanDuel question of the day, is Darnold is a MVP favorite at plus 110. And are you rooting for him? Raymond says, been rooting for Sam all year. Hunter says, I've got the over. C-Bakes, Darnold deserves it. As a Vikings fan, you could be happy for him and jealous of the Seahawks. Drew says he's rooting for Sam as a person, as an ex-Viking, to stick it to the Vikings brain trust. That's fair enough. Nicholas says, as a lifetime Viking fan, I'm fearing if they trade McCarthy to the Bengals for Joe will blow out his knee and McCarthy leads the Bengals to the Super Bowl. You're not crazy for imagining that scenario. That is one thing that you guys have been given so much content with the Vikings having strange things happen to them that you can be very creative when you think of ways that it can go sideways. K-Skull, don't care if he wins the Super Bowl. The results may not have been the same had he stayed. They gambled and they lost. Yeah, we don't really know what the results would have been like. But I think it's really easy to say that you would have been in the conversation if you had quarterback play exactly from Sam like he played this year in Seattle, that you would have been in the discussion as a scary team going into the playoffs with a real chance to compete for the Super Bowl. And that's all you can ever really have is, are you legitimately contending or playing for the Super Bowl or not? And then things need to go your way in the playoffs. Angel Duster says, who would you choose for the hypothetical next Vikings head coach? Sean McDermott or Mike Tomlin? I would easily pick McDermott over Tomlin, but I think Tomlin would be someone that, if he's on the market. Now, my understanding is that because he is not fired, because he stepped away, he is still, this is just what I think I read this, that he's still under contract with the Pittsburgh Steelers. So they would have to trade him, but I mean, that's prodigal son stuff. I like McDermott as a coach. I think he's a very good defensive mind and he learned how to lead a team. There were struggles there early on. I know that there were struggles there early on as a leader, but he grew into it over the years. But Tomlin coming back, that either one of those guys, if you get somebody who's proved themselves at that level, is going to give you a chance to win. If someone's been that good for as long as those two guys were. Hunter, do the Vikings make the playoffs next season? The reason I would say yes is just because of the history. Just because of how the history has gone and how many times they've bounced back when we think that it's over, when we think they're in the dirt, they can't possibly, because they have a ton of talent. I mean, when you go through this team and you go, well, do they have the horses? And you look at Grenard, Van Ginkel, what Turner did in the second half of the season, Cashman, if they could bring back Eric Wilson, Rodgers and Murphy are a good duo at corner. Jalen Redmond was very good. I would assume Jonathan Allen is going to come back. Maybe they'll adjust the contract situation there a little bit, but Jonathan Allen, by the end of the year, I thought was playing really good football. Jordan Mason, if Darisaw is healthy, O'Neal, Jackson is, I think, got a very bright future. And then you have the best receiver in the world or top three or whatever you want to call him. I think in terms of his history and what he's done, you could still call Jefferson the top dog in the NFL. Smith-Njigba certainly this year. Amon-Ra St. Brown has been great. There's many others, but in terms of what he's done for quarterbacks in the past. So, you also get the regression potential for Chicago. I don't think that they're going to fall off the face of the earth. Detroit's going to be trying desperately, but it's another new coordinator. It's another new offensive line. I think this team can make the playoffs next year. Would I, if they were whatever on FanDuel, would I pull out my wallet? No, I wouldn't, because we don't even know who's going to play quarterback yet. If we know who's going to be playing quarterback, then ask me then. Because if that answer is Joe Flacco, then I'm going to say no. If that answer is JJ McCarthy, then they better be darn sure he's going to take the next step. And I'm not sure I'm believing their evaluations after all this. And if it's Kyler Murray, I might just go yes, because he could be the Jeff George. That's a great comp for Kyler Murray, by the way. Not the same player, but a guy who had personality issues in his past. And seemingly no one liked him in Atlanta and Indianapolis. He came to Minnesota, and it was great. Just threw the ball around the yard. Let's see. Javier says, tired of Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah being half-measured, routinely gets fleeced in trades, but doesn't want to pay what it takes to get Burrow, or didn't want to trade more than 2 firsts to get Drake May. See, I'm not sure that any of these criticisms are really fair. When you say routinely fleeced in trades, which one are we talking about? Because just this year, fleeced in the Thielen trade, yes. But let's not forget they traded Sam Howell for a 5th-round draft pick. So, were they fleeced in the Hockenson trade? Not originally, because Hockenson made the Pro Bowl, which meant something at some point to someone. Maybe not so much after recent events, but it had a Pro Bowl caliber season. It was great in 2023, then gets the injury, but he was absolutely worth the trade and the money they spent. If we go through all the trades, the trade down in 2022, that was a fleeced situation. The results were not good there. If the results were different with those prospects, maybe we wouldn't have felt that way, but that was not overall a very good trade. But, not trading for Joe Burrow is not a criticism. And look, here, there is hard evidence that New England was never trading anything for Drake May. When you're saying, well, why didn't you put one more first in the pot? They weren't trading. The hard evidence is that the Giants in their documentary, was it Amazon that did the off-season documentary? The Giants tried to call them to move up from 4 to 3 and were offering the moon. And they said, sorry, we're just not doing this. So that's not a rational criticism for the general manager is, hey, you didn't get Drake May. It's really a rational criticism for the organization that you didn't get to that point after your quarterback got hurt, or even, it's not even after Kirk. See, that's a timeline you can start with is, hey, Kirk got hurt. in 2023 and you should have like not won another game. It's hard not to win a single other game the rest of the way. It's bringing back Kirk after 2022. You sent everybody else out, but said we're going to keep Kirk. When that was the time to do it. That was the time. You knew what the draft class was like in 2024. You knew that that was the time for a reset, but they just didn't have the guts for it. Dan says, I love the Wilfs as owners. Their future is determined by how 9 develops. 9 needs to grow up very quickly and stay on the field or pull the miracle and get Burrow. I don't have any issue that I could come up with the Wilfs for owners when you compare everybody else and how nuts this league is. But they will not ever accept that reset we just talked about. And we may eventually reach that crossroads again where we're saying you don't have an answer at quarterback long-term and your roster is coming apart. And are you going to just sort of hang around in the middle here, or are you going to go through the full rebuild that's required? They've never really wanted to do that. That's Z31 says, can we have our rebuild yet? Well, there's no reason to do it now. You still have Justin Jefferson in his prime, and you still have a lot of players who produced, what did they finish in points against? Like 7th, but in yards per drive and points per drive, they were top 5. Why would you want to try to rebuild that when you have most of that defense coming back? Carl says, my reaction is directly tied to what KOC told us and the hyperbole around it. I trusted his judgment and his opinion. He said he's our franchise quarterback. And that's right. That statement right there will follow him around unless JJ McCarthy becomes the franchise quarterback, which could still happen next year. That statement right there. And then when you listen to him talk about McCarthy at the end of the year and not commit to him, it's a very big gap. But that statement right there for me, it meant a lot for me because, I remember when we were talking about this decision is saying, well, this matches up with, and that's why I didn't think that there was anything nefarious about the decision. Like certain other reporters were kind of presenting it as like, what's going on with those crazy Vikings doing this? And I thought, well, Kevin O'Connell thinks he's the franchise quarterback, then, well, this makes a lot of sense. And I believe that he did. I don't think that he said that just to be nice. And I asked other people about that. And there was a lot of love for what McCarthy did in 2024 in training camp. And that's why you can't totally wash it out. But this year, his offseason gets to start with a fully healthy, except for, a little hand thing that'll heal, fully healthy, can practice, can do, anything that he needs to do. Last year, he just started throwing in January. How are you supposed to, that was always the struggle for me. How is he supposed to be ready to lead this team when he's just starting to throw in January? So even if you believed he was the franchise guy, you had to say that's dubious or that's very risky. Super unknown. It won't matter what quarterback we get as long as rigid, stubborn O'Connell is still here. The Vikings don't have the offensive recipe for postseason or sustained success until they upgrade offensive coaching. So this is a really tough one for me, super unknown, because I just don't really believe that. I look at what succeeds in the NFL and throwing downfield does correlate to success. Drake May and Matthew Stafford were both in the top 5. And you could say, well, McCarthy's not them. McCarthy had his most success throwing downfield, not bombs, but, intermediate passing. He actually had the least success with quick game that everybody wanted. Everybody wanted quick game, but he was not good at it. It was actually the intermediate passing, which was all of his best throws for the entire season. It was like, that was his best work. But those two guys who are in the MVP had the best average depth of target. Sam Darnold last year, when you look at his deep passing, he's the best deep passer in the entire league in this offense. And there's even a stat that I saw about separation of wide receivers, where the Vikings were one of the best this year in terms of separation for the target that the quarterback is throwing at. He just couldn't hit them. And neither could Carson Wentz, by the way. So that number goes for both of them. But they just couldn't find them. The receivers are there. They're open in this offense. And when you talk about rigid, like they did change a lot by the end of the year to win those games, and they ran a lot more. I mean, I just don't. It feels like one of those sort of things that if it gets repeated enough, it kind of becomes the truth. But I think that the overall philosophy is right. Now, are there a lot of times where I've said in the past, hey, dude, you got to run? Now, that was more of a 2024 thing. But their running game was bad. It was totally unsuccessful in 24 and 23. Now, that's where I would say is a reasonable criticism is you've sort of tried to patchwork the running back room and patchwork. And Mason, I think, is the most exciting runner they've had in a long time, but he's not a complete back. Bring back Aaron Jones. That's kind of a half measure because you really love the guy's heart, but was he explosive enough to be a difference maker? No. Alexander Madison, a half measure. I liked Madison too. I didn't like him carrying the ball 30 times a game, right? So, that's where if you say, man, they need to run the ball better and build off the run if they're going to have a great offense. That's true. But if you tell me that the passing game, the way they do it is wrong and is too rigid or something, like I don't see that. I saw a ton of changes schematically by the end of the year. So that's where, and I watched the film back for every single game and I saw a lot changing over the season, but it feels like you just sort of want to like rage out or have somebody else be at fault and not the guy who was throwing the football. Let's see. Is that, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. I think it starts with L. Il Duque? Oh man. El Duque is what I want you to be because it's a great pitcher in the 90s. Have we not considered that neither Sam nor Daniel Jones wanted to be there? Consider JJ's situation. They wanted better opportunities. No, I've considered that, but they had a franchise tag. They didn't want to sign an extension here. That's true, but they had a franchise tag that gave Sam Darnold no choice, and that has been used in recent years. Kirk Cousins in Washington, Dak Prescott in Dallas. So it's not something that's never happened. Like quarterbacks have been franchise tagged in recent memory. Super Unknown says KOC might be a good or great head coach, but he's not a good offensive coach. I just don't believe that. I just don't believe that you can have the best downfield passing game in the entire NFL and the most explosive offense and explosive passing game with Sam Darnold as your quarterback in 2024 and then say they have no idea what they're doing and they're just not any good on offense. It just doesn't make any sense. And I know that they've never had the best DVOA. And look, running is a big part of that. And that's a big problem for them. Now, this year, they ended up on the positive side running wise of EPA, but still, that wasn't like it was a consistent running game from start to finish. And yes, the tag was the only, I would say you got to that, that the tag was the only scenario. And the quarterback, if he doesn't want to be there, but do you think Sam Darnold wasn't going to play for $41 million or was just going to say, okay, well, look, I'm going to only give a half effort? No, he was going to come back and try to win games the same way. And you talk about how it could have been sold. It could have been presented as, look, McCarthy went through a catastrophic thing. He's still our guy down the road, but Sam was great and we're going to bring him back and we'll see what happens. It's better to have two quarterbacks than one. I don't think it would have been that hard to accept for anybody, the explanation for franchise tag him. I think what they thought was that if they franchise tag Sam, they will not be able to spend like drunken sailors in free agency and they will not be able to build a strong enough overall team to win what Kwesi called any kind of fight in the playoffs. That's what they were thinking. So if they could get 75% of the performance of Darnold from JJ McCarthy and have him ascending by the second half of the year and playing his best football going into the playoffs, that they would have a strong enough supporting cast to win a fight in the playoffs that they couldn't win last year because they made every move based on that Rams game. They spent $17 million a year on Will Fries based on the Rams game, because they got dominated the interior of the line. They let go Garrett Bradbury based on the Rams game. Look, Ryan Kelly's a really, really good player, but injuries did play a big part in his recent career before he got here. And if you look at the defensive side, interior pressure, they were not able to create it naturally. They needed to blitz. In the Rams game against Matthew Stafford, they did everything kind of based on that game. Every decision was sort of based on that game. Is that the right way to do it? Like, I understand trying to stack up the weakest parts of your team, but if you don't get the play from your quarterback, you're not going to have anything offensively. Super Unknown says Vikings had better offenses under Zimmer. Yes and no. Yes and no. I mean, 19 was a good offense, but Kevin Stefanski was running that, and he's two-time coach of the year. So it's not like he had a schlub. Also, they had this guy named Dalvin Cook. Pretty darn good when they had 2021. Also, Dalvin Cook was still good in 2021 and 2020. They had Gary Kubiak, who's a legend. And then they had Clint Kubiak, who's going to be the next head coach of the Raiders. So Zimmer, hilariously, for all of his issues with offensive coordinators, had a great run of them. Andre says you're not talking about the main problem. The main problem is KOC not running the ball. So this is, I think, where the mythology begins to become so strong. The main problem is sure as bleep not him not running the ball for last year. The main problem is the guys who were under center were terrible. Absolutely terrible. That's the main problem. That they were as bad as any Vikings quarterback performance in the history of the franchise. That's the reason they did not make the playoffs. That's the reason that they lost a bunch of games, period. It's not because they didn't run enough. It's because their quarterbacks missed wide open receivers, threw terrible interceptions, took tons of sacks, and you could blame the offensive line if you want, and some of it's on the offensive line, but is it really? If you watch the sacks, how many were running right into sacks? How many were Carson Wentz holding on to the ball too long? That's what happened, is that the quarterbacks played nowhere near quality NFL football. And if you're telling me that they can't win without this great magical running game, they have 2 seasons where they won 13 and 14 games where they did not have good running games, and they still won 13 and 14 games. Not only that, but when you look at even the efficiency of the Seattle run game, now they build off of it, and that's the Kubiak way. And again, Clint is really good at what he does. It's not the best running game in the world. It's a consistent one. They lean on it. They've got a really good set of running backs they've used all year. I mean, the Patriots run game is not super special. They drafted Travion Henderson. He was good at times. He was bad at times. The run games in the NFL, I looked this up. The only run game that was as good as the Vikings or better in total expected points added was the Rams. And even expected points added per carry was the Rams out of the final 4 teams. That was the only team that was better. It was not an efficient overall run game for the Seattle Seahawks throughout the season. They just built off it really well. But it gets to this point where people just say the same thing over and over again because at times it's been true. At times it's been true that they didn't run well enough, to the point where you lose the perspective of what happened here. Could they play off the run better? Absolutely. Can they stick to it better to control the clock a little more? Can they do it in the goal line? 3rd down and 1. Oh my God, fix that. That's ludicrous how they performed in 3rd and 4th and short. But is that the reason? Is that the reason that they didn't succeed this year when they won 14 the year before with an explosive pass offense? Of course not. So, I mean, I think there's just going to be some people in every fan base that just want the coach fired no matter what. So I can't do much about that. Okay, that's a funny comment. KOC is going to be in the Hall of Fame before Belichick. I thought that we would talk a little more about, but it is Raymond's right. It's a crime that Jim Marshall. I mean, don't put him in the future if you weren't going to put him in while he was around. If once, one of the things you can look at that's really fun. Well, hey, if you're watching this live stream, you'll find this fun. Is you can now go back and look at the sack numbers for the Purple People Eaters, because what Pro Football Reference did a couple years ago was they went through and they watched or looked at box scores or however they figured this out. I think it was maybe box scores and film, and they tried to figure out every sack that happened before 1982, which is crazy to do, but they were able to do it. And there are some years where Jim Marshall outperforms Alan Page, but Alan Page goes to the Pro Bowl because they didn't count sacks. And Alan Page's reputation, and look, Page is like, all time of all time. He's in that upper, what I was talking about with Dion and Reggie White, Alan Page and Carl Eller. They both belong there. But Jim, I think he just didn't get the credit because those guys were so dominant, and it's always been unfair to him. And in a league that talks about availability being the best ability, well, my gosh, this is the most available player. And a league that talks about character and leadership and everything else, the best leader of great, great all-time legendary teams. I've never understood that. I have thought that, I agree. I've always thought that was just a crime, just preposterous that he is not in the Hall of Fame. Stan says, hesitant to fire them all. They've had a couple good seasons and had something to build on. I've been a Vikings fan since their first game ever, and firings reset the clock. That absolutely true. Absolutely true. That if you're going to fire people, it has to match up with the timeline. And I think this is why the 2026 season does kind of feel like the final dragon to slay or whatever, the last big opportunity, is because when you look at the roster and you look at the salary cap situation and you look at the quarterback, it does feel like coming to the end of something that you started in 2022 to get to this point. And then if you're starting anew, do you want to do it with someone else, or do you believe in these guys? And they have to show that you believe in these guys, or that they should believe in these guys. Score One More says, we can't cry over spilled milk. Well, your former quarterback going to the Super Bowl feels like a little more than spilled milk. But fair enough. You're going for dairy references here. Put all their eggs in JJ's cart and then take them out after 1 year doesn't build confidence. Well, you also can't go forward with somebody if they're performing at this level. I mean, that's the issue, right? You can't see what just happened and say, yeah, let's just try it again. Because if that happens and he plays the same way, then you are all absolutely 100% gone. Modern Moose, I hope Harrison Smith gets into coaching at some point. True defensive conductor. The organization is going to miss his brain as much as his physical abilities. And that's something they have to answer when we talk about how are they going to fix this. That's something they have to answer is if Harrison Smith retires, then who is that guy? Josh Metellus, I think, could take some of that role. But do you have someone who's the playmaker too? Because Harrison Smith, yeah, he's brilliant, but also he's physically gifted as well. And even to the end, still physically gifted and maybe not speed, but also a lot of, like catching the ball and physical movement and, quickness and stuff like your quickness can remain even if your longer speed isn't the same as it used to be. So a playmaker, right? A natural playmaker. Can you get that person to go along with Josh Metellus and Jay Ward and, maybe Theo Jackson taking a step forward? Sean says reports from Matthew and plenty of others coming out of camp were solid to good, not great. But as I recall, the bullets started flying and JJ started swimming and catching all off guard. Yes. During training camp, I thought that he was pretty good. It's very clear that joint practices are not predictive of seasons, because I thought the Patriots were a mediocre team that was going to go 7-10 this year coming out of that joint practice, and they are in the Super Bowl. So those don't always tell the truth, but you're right that training camp for JJ McCarthy, it was a lot of ups and downs, some good practices, some rough practices, but they had earned benefit of the doubt from us in many ways. in, well, this was their first round draft pick. This was their guy. This was the guy that KOC wanted, didn't draft, Bo Nix. And this was the guy they called the franchise quarterback. And this is the guy they let Darnold go for. And so, okay, he's doing all right in training camp, but he's probably missing more throws than he should and probably taking more sacks than he should, but it's coming along and it's developing. And I remember saying at the end, predicting 11 wins, and nope, you didn't move me off 11 wins with your training camp and so forth. I mean, it wasn't a Sam Bradford caliber training camp, but I thought it was okay. But there is no, and this is my point about, you also have to factor in to the entire thing when you're making the decision, the theory that you don't know until the person is really out there what it's going to look like. And they had this option to give themselves more information and they didn't use it. But I thought that he was going to be, especially after that Chicago game, I thought he was going to be in the playoffs. I thought he was going to be good, and or at least good enough. And yet it did not work out that way. But he has been good in practice. So he was very good in the 2024 camp. I can see why they did it. And in my article at purpleinsider.football, I spent a lot of time on the other side, not just, hey, your process was flawed, but here's where your process did make sense. And that was part of it. Oh, Modern Moose with the super chat. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Cheers to another great season. Well, thank you. It was a challenging season, I would say. Fire Mark Wolf is funny. It was a challenging season at times, journalistically, but we made it. You guys make it very, very fun, even when it's not the team having a lot of fun, because it's always an interesting discussion. Score One More says, remember when Denny Green said he was starting Dante Culpepper? He was actually ready to play. I believe he went to the Pro Bowl that year. Well, that right there, Score One More, is part of the process discussion, because there's a lot of examples. It's not just Dante, but Dante's a good one. There's a lot of examples of a guy got to practice for an entire year and he got to grow and develop. And look, here's the other thing. Let's say Sam Darnold came back and was just not the same guy on a franchise tag. And through 8 weeks, he's, 8 games, let's say 3-5. And it's just not worked out. And he turned into a pumpkin, let's say. Then you could just develop McCarthy for 8 weeks and put him in, and no one would be upset. Okay, he got a lot more work. That was like, not Stroud, but that was like Drake May, where they played Brissett until the wheels came off, and then they put him in, and then they, went from there. But they felt like the Super Bowl window has opened. We have to stack the roster and create a Super Bowl caliber roster. That's what they thought. And they were not wrong about that, about trying to create the Super Bowl roster, but missed the fact that hit wrong on the fact that if JJ was catastrophically bad, then you're going to waste an entire year of this roster with no fallback whatsoever. Let's see. D. Kirsch, that's why I'm trying to put them on the screen, even if they're little, is so you could see it if I get it wrong. And I always apologize for that. If you feel like, oh, Matthew's going to mess up my name, you can put it in parentheses if you like, how to pronounce it. Would you consider trading for Stroud as a potential reclamation? What would you give up first and a future second? Stroud is a hard one because there are a couple of coordinators in, but man, they have not built an offensive line for him. And there is something real with him. And I think it, maybe like take it. It's almost like since he played the Vikings that one time, he's been a totally different guy. The team's figured out some stuff about maybe how he identifies or how he sees the field or whatever. But Stroud's arm talent, and this was a Darnold issue before he got here, Stroud's arm talent is immense. His decision-making has just gone totally awry. And what I see from him all the time is trying way too hard to make a play when there's nothing there. It's like, no, I can make this throw. I can make this play. And you're like, dude, you don't have to do this right now. You don't have to try to make this play right now. You could just throw it away and then go on to the next play. But would I do it? I mean, I think the answer is yes. First round pick to give up is pretty tough. I mean, I don't even, would you trade like McCarthy and a second for Stroud? I don't know if I love that. Stroud has shown his upside. He's a really tough one because he has shown his upside, but he's also shown a lot of flaws. With a team that knows how to play defense and not really offense, can he throw it down the field though? Yeah, he absolutely can. I might. I mean, he's been in the playoffs every year. I know his defense has been great, but the Vikings defense is great. He has gotten a team to the playoffs every year. Yeah, I might do that. Trying to add a new wrinkle. No, I appreciate that. If you folks have new ideas for quarterbacks, please. I think that if the trade was McCarthy and a second, that feels like too much. McCarthy and a third, because you're going with a quarterback that is a more favorable contract situation, but one that does not have a sample size of playing well versus one that has 3 playoff appearances and a couple of playoff wins in CJ Stroud, but not always pretty. But if you look at CJ Stroud's numbers, if he had played, I've been working on this, get the screen share so I could show other stuff like the full screen. And of course, yeah, so is that showing the full screen? No, I'm still screwing this up, aren't I? I guess I still don't have that right. I thought I had it right to be able to show the full screen. I guess I don't. Or does that do it? It kind of does it. Let's see what we can see with CJ Stroud's passing numbers this year. Because I actually haven't really looked or thought a lot about Stroud. Where does he rank? It's not looking great. Oh, yikes. No, he graded 34th this year by PFF. No, I don't think so. That is much worse than I thought. That was actually right next to JJ McCarthy for where he graded by PFF this year. That's much worse than I thought. Modern Moose, what is it in particular about JJ McCarthy that excited the Vikings leadership so much? What sold them so darn heavily? I think it was number one, as you've seen, like he could throw the ball hard. He has arm. O'Connell doesn't love arm talent for a quarterback that just throws the ball hard, but he's got a strong arm and throws the ball extremely hard. So he can make every throw would be a way to put it. And he showed a lot of, and this is weird to say now because he had a lot of immature moments when he was actually out there, but he showed a lot of maturity early on. And I've always wondered if the injury like took a toll on him mentally and physically. And I have talked to players who've said that, an injury changed them like kind of emotionally. And maybe the pressure and the criticism and all those things can make you react differently than you think you would ever react. Kind of like when you get in a car accident and like right after that, if you've ever been in a car accident, you're like, what happened? What just happened? Right. And then the next time you get in the car, you might be a little more, it could change you. But in 2024 camp, he showed everything that they thought he was going to be as a first round draft pick. And that's what they were working with. That's what they were sold on, was how he performed then. Now, when you kind of go hindsight on it, well, yeah, his second team reps didn't really do a lot with Justin Jefferson during that camp with the first team. So it was training wheels. It was one preseason game where he was very good, but it was training wheels. That's where the incomplete information comes. Like you saw a lot of the good stuff that they were looking for, and he checked every box for me in 2024, which is why I never questioned O'Connell saying he's our franchise quarterback, and why when they went to Darnold, I was like, well, must be, because I had seen it in front of me in 2024, and I thought that he was going to be good this year as well. But also, I wasn't privy to all the information behind the scenes, And I am privy to the history of this thing, which says it takes a while. And Kwesi even referenced that. He's like, well, in the first number of starts historically, it could be hard. And then you hope the guy turns a corner. Like but you didn't really build the roster to factor for that. You built the roster to win. Joe says, I've already moved on. KOC and Darnold, not the same as Kubiak and Darnold. KOC's offense does not translate to playoff victories. I don't know, man. I don't know. They've played 2 playoff games. I don't know. I mean, here's the thing. When Clint Kubiak was here, you all said that he sucked too. So I don't know. Like, I mean, you love him now because you see him in the Super Bowl. But I didn't hear a whole lot of people saying, man, I can't wait to see Clint Kubiak in the Super Bowl someday when he was here, because you watched every game and every mistake you thought was the worst thing that ever happened. And he was the dumbest play caller of all time. And he should be fired too. There was a lot of that when Clint Kubiak was here. So I don't know. What I think about Clint versus O'Connell is that Clint grew up in a world where you will stick with that run game and then build everything off of that. But it's also a world where, and that's like the Kubiak and Shanahan staple, that I think they understand really, really well defenses, tendencies, and all their quarterbacks at some point that have success in that system, they don't reach the Super Bowl unless they can make a play. And when you say like, oh, well, Kubiak's much better than KOC, it's like, well, I mean, we saw a whole season of Darnold do the same exact stuff, which is, them taking advantage of route combinations and him making great throws and open receivers and all the same stuff. I mean, I think Clint is really good at his job. I think the only real difference is kind of how they work off of the run a lot more in Seattle and how he was able to get rid of the ball quicker in Seattle. I think it is actually a little bit better of a fit because it's Kyle Shanahan's freaking offense that he learned in San Francisco and then came back over to with Clint, who was in San Francisco. And it's all that Shanahan and Kubiak stuff that's been proven, but it's not like KOC's not from that tree. When it comes to Sean McVay and their offense, to me, it's what it usually comes down to is if the quarterback didn't play well, then everyone works their way reverse engineer back to, it must be the play calls. That's how it usually works. If you don't want to acknowledge that the guy just couldn't make the plays. Drew says, could the Vikings take a quarterback in the first round? I don't think there's any chance of that. There has to be one. Looks like to me, there's one first round quarterback. Team D1, you trade for Drew Lock. Shouldn't cost too much draft capital. A ton of upside. Is there really a ton of upside with Drew Lock? I mean, that's when I asked for creative ideas, you hit one. And it's a quarterback who's developed for several seasons behind other people. I don't actually totally hate it, but I also don't think that it creates kind of what you're looking for, which is someone who could, you could actually count on. If you're saying Drew Lock and JJ McCarthy is our quarterback room, that sounds to me like you are talking about risk. Very, very, very risky. Aaron says we have to move on from him and get a good quarterback, draft a quarterback, and develop him. Oh, you're saying the fans say that. And then also after 10 games, give up on the drafted quarterback. Have a little patience. Well, the problem with that, Aaron, is that you can't really have a lot of patience under this circumstances and say to Justin Jefferson, hey, just wait 2 or 3 more years. He'll be ready. Say to Blake Cashman or Jonathan Grenard, just give him a couple years. He'll get there. How do you do that? They have too much talent to do that and too much pressure on themselves as a regime to do that. It's not the fans. I mean, it's because you're saying, oh, fans say this, but they're actually contradictory and whatever. I don't think so. I don't think it's contradictory that fans wanted to draft a quarterback in 2024 because that was the right decision to make, which was to move on from Cousins rather than give him a big contract and then draft a quarterback in a very, very good quarterback class. But when you get a sample size, it's 10 games. It's 2 years. It's 2 years. He has been on the team for what? 750 days or something. And all you have to show for it is 10 games and a 72 quarterback rating. I mean, that's, you can't put that on the fans for thinking, yeah, you better look into some other options. You'd love to give everybody, it would be great if this was a world where you could give everybody 5 years to figure it out. But that's just not how sports work. And well, yeah, he's been injured. It's not his fault, but the world just can't wait for you. Unlikely YouTuber going back to the, yeah. I mean, look, I'm going to roll my eyes at you if you're like, we couldn't have won the Super Bowl because KOC sucks. Because that just sounds effing stupid when you won 14 games the year before with Sam Darnold and then had an opportunity to create a better team in the free agency and so forth. Maybe spending a little more wisely. It just doesn't add up. It just seems like you're like coping or whatever you want to use, trying to squish some backwards logic into they wouldn't have won anyway. Like, okay, with a top 5 defense and Jefferson and Addison and all the same stuff. And Seattle, by the way, had a really good offense, but they didn't have the best offense in the world. This offense won't work in the playoffs. They played 2 games. They played 2 games in the playoffs. They had actually a good performance from their offense against the Giants in one of the playoff games. Like it just none of it adds up. None of it really works. By the way, also hysterically, this offense won't work in the playoffs. This is Sean McVay's offense that won the Super Bowl. That's why you hired KOC. Remember? Like it's the same offense. It's the same offense, man. This offense, like this scheme won't work in the playoffs when Matthew Stafford just again threw for like 400 yards using the same exact stuff. I mean, I know they've changed it since then, but in 2021 they did. It's not the scheme. You can say it's not the passing scheme. You could say they need to run the ball better. You could say that they need to be a little bit more patient when it comes to choosing your spots to push down the field or not always throwing on 3rd and 4th and 1. You could say that if you don't have a running back that scares anybody, you're not going to be able to build off the run game as well. All that stuff is fair. These are details of an offense that absolutely works if it's done correctly, but you have to have somebody to be able to throw the football to the wide open wide receivers. K-Skull says, I've heard Willis wouldn't fit here. Willis himself said KOC wasn't interested. Willis said that? When did he say that? I don't know if he said that. That wouldn't make sense for him to say something like that right now, but I guess you'll have to tell me where that was. As far as like fit here with Malik Willis, I don't know. That I don't know if he would fit with this offense or not. He certainly adds a playmaking element and has the arm strength to do it. And he's learned, I think, to throw with touch, but he hasn't played a lot of football either. Not a twerk, probably the wrong episode, but I'm sink or swim with JJ McCarthy. If he sucks, then on to the next coaching staff. I think that's logical, but it's also not gonna happen. Like they just can't do that. I mean, yeah, I guess if the ownership says that's what you're doing, then you have to work within those parameters. But I think the ownership wants to win and doesn't want to have the potential for this to just sink into the ocean or a lake, considering we're in the Midwest. K-Skull says, I think that competition McCarthy versus Willis would be fun to watch. I think so as well. The physical skill there, the velocity of the football. Can Willis really be a franchise quarterback based on what we've seen? I mean, maybe. But I don't know how the league feels if the league, because we all assume that one game against the Ravens was earning him a ton of money, but that might not be true. Teams really hang on to their draft evaluations of guys. Modern Moose, do you have to go get a veteran to help bolster the room and mentor McCarthy, or do you get a, say, Fields or Wilson type guy to compete? You can get them for a QB3, but you can't get them to be a potential starter. That I don't think that you can do. You can't, I mean, they wouldn't even play Zach Wilson over Quinn Ewers in Miami. So, I mean, I don't think that really speaks too well of him. And Justin Fields is just bad. So those guys sort of look like Sam Darnold's, but they, at least with Sam Darnold, showed a lot of potential through the years and then had like catastrophic runs with Carolina and the Jets, whereas Fields and Wilson have just never shown anything at all. High box 4x4 says got to be a do or die year for KOC and Quasey, year 5. That's how I look at it. Yep. Score one more says after appearing in the 99 playoffs, Dennis Green let Jeff George and Randall Cunningham walk to start Dante Culpepper and tried to get Dan Marino, just to show you how random quarterbacks can be. That is true. He did, but he also had a year of evaluating Dante Culpepper behind the scenes. And Dante had a year of practicing, which JJ McCarthy did not. Jay, if you write every comment in capital letters, I'm assuming you're a crazy person. Because I don't want to scream the question. Jay asks, do you want JJ to start in 2026 or not? That is something that I keep, did I want Darnold re-signed? Yes, I did. And the comment section did not enjoy my commentary those nights. I can tell you that if you go back and look. I said it a lot of times last year and argued with a lot of people over it with Darnold. And I've brought it up a million times this year. I just think it's unfair to judge a guy on 2 games when he has a great season. It's one of the best seasons by any quarterback in Vikings history, and you throw it all out because of the way it ended. I just didn't think that was the right logic. And I also just didn't, I thought it was very, very, very risky to go to a guy who had lost a lot of weight and who had gone through a very, very serious injury and surgery and had played so little football in college. It was very concerning to me. And I felt like there was a middle option. I wrote an article about, how you could franchise tag him and still improve your team and all those things. But this is, people have, if you say, yes, actually, that was my opinion back then you get, well, stop gloating. Why are you dunking on everybody like you're right about everything? I'm not. That was my actual opinion. But as far as do I want them to start JJ McCarthy this year, I am of 2 minds on that because I think there's a part of me that says, well, the guy you let go made the Super Bowl, so make it work. Figure it out. But then there's a more practical part that says you just got to go get another quarterback because if you were in the top 15 in offense next year, then you can probably be a serious contender, especially with defenses kind of dominating these days. So I do go back and forth on that. And I think there's the logical way of thinking about it, which is, yeah, let's live in reality. They're going to get somebody else. They told us at the end of the year press conference, they're going to get somebody else. But should you just sort of sink or swim? Yeah. Well, what if you end up doing kind of both though? Because yes, you think, well, he's either going to be really good and it's going to work or he's going to be really bad. But what if it's both? Isn't that really the trouble with Kyler Murray in Arizona, which is he's kind of both? He's kind of amazing and he's kind of terrible, and you're not really sure if that can get you anywhere. And the only bet for the Vikings would be that you get more amazing than terrible because they're a better franchise and they're coached better and they're not insane. And, maybe it works out for him personality wise if he's somewhere else and not there. I don't know. But just in general, a lot of the quarterbacks who live in the middle and frustrate the heck out of you, they're really good sometimes and really bad sometimes. I mean, CJ Stroud probably drives Texans fans nuts because he's good enough to get them to the playoffs, but he's not good. At least in the last couple years, he's just okay and good sometimes and frustrating other times. So what do you really have there? So what if you bring back JJ McCarthy and you end up with 9-8 and he throws like 19 touchdowns and 13 picks? I'm thinking of like JP Lossman's stat line, the one year he was decent. And then you go, well, did it work or did it not work? Like he was better. He wasn't good, but is he going in the right direction? Do we fire everybody? Like, what are we supposed to do? You know, right? What kind of outcome is that? The middle outcome is we still don't even know. And then you're going into the last year. Then you're probably saying, well, he made improvement, but is he plateaued or is he actually ascending? And then at that point, have you spent all the money and the cap space around the rookie contract? So there's not much else you could do. You've kicked every dollar down the road, and then guys are getting older and right. So there is a world where you could end up not sinking or swimming, which is kind of the Viking way. Anyway, okay, well, I'm sorry if I didn't get to every comment. I apologize for that, but I'm starting to run a little low on the voice here, and I've got some other podcasts to do this week, so I don't want to completely blow it. But you are right to question Malik Willis and his 100 passes. I think that's totally fair. Adrian thinks that McDermott deserved to be fired. I don't know about that. I mean, you get one call and then all of a sudden you're not fired. Is that right? Let's see. Dan says, why did Kwesi move up in the 2024 draft without an agreement to get to the top 3, then move up again? Oh, yeah, you're talking about being fleeced. Well, I mean, Turner played pretty well in the second half of this year. It wasn't, I don't think it was to get to the top 3. I think it was insurance in case they needed to get the last quarterback on the board, because they were drafting 11th is where they were originally drafting. And it was very possible that all the quarterbacks could go fast and then they would have to trade into the top 10, and they wanted insurance to be able to do that. Because you don't know how the board's going to play out until it actually does play out. Jerry, what if Ryan Kelly doesn't retire? I think they'll let him go if he doesn't. You just can't bring a guy back after that, after 3 concussions. Corey says, it doesn't seem to me like they need to blow it up. They just need to lose their draft picks more wisely. Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, you mean like if you're going to bring these guys in, you need to find a way to use them. Yeah, not waste your draft capital. Not a twerk. Season starts out with 3 tough defenses, then it gets easier for the remainder. JJ struggles in those games. Is he starting game 4? Probably not. I mean, it's going to really come down to a quarterback competition. And if he were to win it and then start off 0-3, yeah, then it's over. That's what happened with EJ Manuel in 20, was it 15? 14. Started the first 4 games, really struggled. They went to Kyle Orton. And, you know, it ended without the playoffs. Phenom says Kwesi brought in Cashman, Grenard, Van Ginkel, Darnold, Robinson, Rodgers, Hawkinson, but he sucks. Well, that's the trouble with putting everything on one person. They said that everybody was going to work together. And so when I look at it, I say, this is what everyone has come up with. KOC, Flores, Kwesi, Rob Brzezinski, Ryan Grigson, everybody else who freaking works there. I don't like to put stuff on one person. Oh, this guy did this guy did this. Oh, you were in the room for that meeting? Well, I'm not in the room for the meeting. And if you're going to say collaboration, well, what they've collaborated on is some amazing free agent decisions and some great veteran players that have made a team that was capable of winning 14 and was very, very good this season on defense and had the offensive parts to be good as well. Some of them were injured, some of them underperformed, but it was mostly on the quarterback position. So I don't look at all at this roster and say, oh man, well, they've really botched it because of missed draft picks. No, they haven't botched the roster. The roster is good. They've found players like Redmond. They've developed someone like Josh Metellus. But some of the misses have consequences to them that have made it harder to build a complete roster and to build a team across the board that you could say is truly worthy of competing for the Super Bowl. Because I don't know if it was a true Super Bowl contender this year across the board, even with the money that they spent. Javier says, wonder if JJ McCarthy's performance at the end of the year could be considered fool's gold. That's how I was not, I mean, I used fool's gold during the season as the term. So yeah, it is. It's just non-predictive. Like, he made the throws, they won the games, but non-predictive. The Giants had fired their whole team. The Packers didn't try. They literally didn't try. Like, they didn't play their starters. Washington had fired everybody or was on route to firing their defensive coordinator. I mean, Dallas fired their defensive coordinator and was right. So, like, anyway, fool's gold is probably the right term, but also just non-predictive is the way I'd put it. Anyway, well, great conversation, everybody. Don't forget, if you're jumping in the comments late and somehow you got to this point in the show, answer that FanDuel question of the day, which was, are you rooting for Sam? He is plus 110 to win MVP in the Super Bowl. So good chat, everybody. Thanks so much for all the conversation. I'll figure out next time how to get the chat a little bigger. I'll work on that for next time on the video. But hopefully you still enjoyed the discussion, and there's many more on the way. I love going back and forth with you guys, answering questions, comments, thoughts, feelings, and all that. So I look forward to doing again very soon. I think tomorrow night I'll be live with Manny Hill, so we'll have a real good conversation about anything that comes up, the Super Bowl, things that are on your guys' mind, and so forth. And we'll look also, is going to spend a lot of time this offseason probably looking at other things around the NFL that may have ripple effects or just catch my eye, and not just Viking stuff. And then as we go through February, we'll start to get some rumors, some movements. The combine is coming up. Just put in the application to go to the combine for the, what would this be? The 5th or 6th time? No, I guess it wasn't in 2021. Was there? So maybe this will be like the 5th combine for Purple Insider. I don't know. We'll see. But I applied for that today. So, lots on the way. But there'll be plenty of room for discussion for sure as we lead up to the Super Bowl. So thanks everybody again. And